lengthy agenda tonight. And I guess we'll start with a review of community promotions. So why don't we just dig right into that, Flora? And I think we need to make sure that our newer members are aware of this process and how it works, and we'll see if we... Oh, and I've got tickets to the symphony here in case anybody wants them. I'll pass them around.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I...
You're right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that right? Okay. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just to kind of give you a real brief orientation on community promotions. We're at kind of a weird timeline here this year, and this will be the only year that we're at a strange timeline like this. If you'll recall, and with those of you who are new, you probably wouldn't recall as readily, but we had a couple odd funding programs come together this year, one of which was the orphanized agency funds that was a unique program for this year only that put our community promotions program off when it normally would, that you would be used to seeing it. My proposal is that we would probably need to do this again in March, April timeframe, so that from now on we could be on a March, April rotation, which would really be helpful for us as it relates to preparing the budget each year. And so I'm asking for your patience with regard to having to deal with this again here later in the spring. We have informed our applicants that this is a possibility that in the spring they'll see another round of this again for the next fiscal year. But if we can look at this from an April standpoint from here on out, that would really be helpful from a budgetary standpoint, and that we'll be able to gather your direction on this program. This program, as a reminder, is a program designed to use tax dollars to leverage out-of-town visits into the community for events and activities that take place here in Casper. And so each year, council decides whether or not they want to set funds aside. Here recently, council has decided that in-kind donations, facility use, etc., would be what these dollars are used for. However, council did add the caveat in this particular cycle to ask for cash applications in the event that there were extraordinary ideas out there that might require cash investment that council might have an interest in. And so you'll see quite a bit of cash being requested this year with regard to that possibility. There's an extraordinary event out there to potentially fund. I would tell you that from a budgetary standpoint, the dollars that you set aside in the budget for this year, if you'll look on your spreadsheet that Fleur you have handy, is actually at a funding level of $21,900. The trick that you have to face here is with all of the cash donations and so on that are included, there's actually a $112,000 ask of you to consider. That number not only includes the cash request, but also the in-kind requests and the facility usage and all that kind of thing that we would want to fund through this fund. If I could have Fleur kind of walk us through the voting sheet here. You have this electronically, or you will have at least, to consider these discussions, and your direction this evening as to how you would like to ultimately come to a conclusion on this item would be very helpful.
Your Honor, members of council. So as you can see, this is what your voting sheet will look like. We will email it out, so that way it will add up all the columns for you. Basically, you have three fields to vote in. So there's cash, there's the cash request, in-kind, and facilities. For cash, you're asked how much you would like to give. You don't have to give the full ask. You can do any amount or none. For the in-kind and facilities, we do it as a yes or no, because it is hard to say give them half of what they ask if it's one thing that they want, like a facility that costs $2,500. If you say half, we can't give them half of the facility. So for those, it's just historically been yes or no. So you'll notice that when you get the spreadsheet electronically, it'll only allow you to put yes or no in it, but it does give you the amount. And then the amount will be totaled in the vote result. And at the very bottom, it'll show you how much you've allocated. If your number goes above 21.9, the little box will change so that you can see, it'll turn itself red. So you can see if you've gone over that amount and adjust. That's basically the vote sheet, historically how we've done it. Some of the columns we've added, can this legally be funded? So we did have our city attorney go through and look through them. We also checked to see if they met the community promotion guidelines that council set forth in 2017. Those were all included as part of your information packet, as part of the packet. So you can see if it qualified, and then there's one of them that we said maybe not, and there's explanation in the additional information to consider. There's also room for you to take notes there if you would like to. Anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Maybe a quick reminder, Fleur, of how we came about that, or came to that sum, 21.9.
Sure. So last year, we usually use what we went off of last year. So I believe last year, council set aside $25,000, and they only allocated roughly 21.9. And so this year, that was what was set aside in the budget.
And did we have to come down from over 100,000 like we after this time?
Yes. So I believe it was in maybe 2015. It might have been 16. It was like 114,000, and gradually it's been going down based on sales tax revenue, as well as the amount the council's been allocating. We've taken it down.
I mean, requests though, or have we had to go from a request of 100,000 plus down to 21 before? Has that been typical?
Yes.
Okay.
So when we used to allocate more to it, and before council restricted it, in recent years that council restricted it to no cash. Before that, we received more than 100,000. Sometimes we'd have like $300,000 worth of requests. If that makes sense. Even though we were allocating 100,000 at the time. So we've always had more than what we've allocated.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Fleur?
Now,
Mike first.
yeah, so that I understand here, like where the hockey club asked for $10,000, if we granted that $10,000, that'd be dollar for dollar off of the 21.9.
Your Honor, so for the facilities and thank you for asking that. The 10,000 is the total amount, so that is split 50-50. So if you said yes to the facilities request of 10,000, the city would pay 5,000 of that, and the hockey club would pay 5,000 of that. So that's half of the request. The cash, if you said 5,000, that would you'd be giving them the full 5,000. But for facilities and in-kind, it's half of what it would be.
Okay. Steve?
Thank you. I guess that was what my question was. So total cash in-kind facilities request, that cannot exceed the 21.9, correct?
I think what they're asking is, does the facility and in-kind request count against that 21.9? Or is that just cash, the 21.9?
Your Honor, yes, it does count. However, when it totals it up, it's in the formula that'll only look at half of it. So you're seeing the full amount, but when it totals it, it's only going to add in 5,000 if you vote yes.
Right, but that subtracts from the 21.9, right?
Yes, so 5,000 would, if you said yes to hockey for 10,000, 5,000 would come out of that 21.9. Correct.
Other questions for Fleur?
The 21.9, do we want to try to match that with everything as possible? Do we, if it came down to only 19,000, somehow everybody's like, 19, do we need to match that completely?
Your Honor, that's completely up to council. You don't have to allocate. I think what you're asking is, do you have to allocate the full amount? You do not. Historically, we've just always, whatever you allocate up to that number.
Other questions for Fleur? So you'd like these votes back to you by,
Next week would be great.
is that reasonable?
Mr. Mayor, if I may interject, what we would likely do is take in your information pursuant to whatever deadline you set this evening and bring it back to you and say, this is what we think your data is indicating by way of a response from the council. And then at that point, you would need to say yes or no and or give us differing direction than what might be reflected in what staff received.
And the other step we have followed in the past is that if someone feels that an agency is getting shortchanged, they can make a pitch for why they would like us to change our votes. And sometimes that's influenced people and sometimes it hasn't. It's difficult. So, Mike?
Will these entities be coming before a meeting to make a presentation, or do we just need to decide this based on what we've got in front of us?
Well, the latter. We've never had presentations on this before. That's what the application form is for. Ray?
So Carter, you're saying you want us to come up with the deadline today, then you're gonna come back, present what you guys have found, correct?
What we have received from all of you,
Okay.
and then get further direction based on that data.
Okay.
Yep, that's the idea.
Okay. And we have plenty of time, don't we? I mean, when is the earliest event scheduled that we're being asked to fund?
Your Honor, so we allowed requests from December until, so we'll back pay. But
okay.
December was when we said it was gonna start through, so it was half essentially a fiscal year.
Okay.
I'm not sure, I think that the hockey club, since it's season events, I think they had ice time that they might look to get paid back. So December was the earliest that it could start.
What's reasonable, folks, as far as how much time we need to get this filled out and get it to Fleur?
I think a week is more than
Yeah, and then have it in by next meeting.
Okay, by next Tuesday?
And Mr. Mayor, if it's okay with the council, for that night, we will have it prepared and ask for further direction at that point.
Well, let's make it Monday then. So how much time do you need to crunch the numbers, Fleur?
Yeah, so if it's here by Monday, then Tuesday I could present it all back to you. If
Okay.
you want it to go out in the packet, then I would suggest Friday. If you want to receive it for the weekend so you can review what everyone voted on and what it would look like, would be Friday. But if you're willing to just look at it on Tuesday, then Monday would be great.
I could get it done by Friday.
Right.
Yeah. Friday, okay?
Friday.
All right, let's get it to Fleur by Friday. Friday at the end of the day, how much time do you need?
We'll make it work. I
Okay.
mean, the packet goes out at the end of the day, so it'd have to be earlier to go out in the
Let's shoot
packet.
for noon Friday. How's that?
Perfect.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
Okay. Designated dog areas. Do you want to open this up, Carter?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Council will recall a discussion that occurred just prior to the holidays with regard to the animal care and control ordinance, which spawned this discussion. This discussion is relating to the potential that council might see in regards to creating another dog area in sort of a companion discussion to the ordinance dialogue that came about prior to the holidays. In your packets, you got an exhibit or a series of exhibits that gave you a number of locations to potentially consider, along an array of services for each of those locations that you could also consider. So, for example, one of the sort of the premium concepts, I guess you'd say, is to create a full-service dog park that would have features and, maintenance requirements and fencing and other features that you might want to include that would exercise a dog or a pet. All the way to the idea of simply having unmaintained land available with no fencing and so on that would be designated as sort of an open area for dogs and their owners to frequent. So we've tried to give you that range. We've tried to give you a range of ideas. We're certainly not by any means suggesting that all of the areas that we proposed in your exhibits need those kinds of enhancements made. We're just trying to simply give you a bunch of ideas that could be used. You have the discretion, obviously, to decide one, many, or none of those areas to be selected, if at all. If I could have Mr. Cortez kind of walk us through some of the elements of this discussion as it relates to these ideas, as well as a recommendation that you might consider, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, Council, as Carter usually does, it teed it up very nice. I would say what you see here, I put it's kind of the end of your packet, but I put it up first because there's probably a geography component to the whole discussion. So I think having a map to kind of show what we currently have, which is basically Morad. We have a smaller dog park that is maintained by the Platte River Trails Trust, and we also up here have what is known as Lake Mackenzie Dog Park, which is just kind of off of Bryan Stock Trail. That's what we currently have. You'll see numerically we have, and they reference back to your pages within the packet, of different sites that could be potential sites if you wanted to put us in that direction. Do keep in mind that we have over 40 different parks within the city of Casper, so really any of those could be a candidate. But we kind of picked ones that maybe have some space where maybe we wouldn't be infracting on activities that are already currently going on with, say, like a midget football team that practices at their local park, to where we might get that pushed back. You know, if we said, hey, we're going to now fence this area off and turn it into the designated dog area. So really what I'm, back to what Carter said, it really is up to you what direction you want to put us on. We can do some more homework and get you back to what you might be interested in. I am going to fast forward to one part that we kind of had a little bit of a, as far as maybe just a recommendation or maybe something that might kind of pique your interest, that just happened to pop up on our radar last week, which is this dog park, what's kind of her potential location that could be there. It's on the east side, which we kind of, if you just recall geographically, we don't really have anything on the east side per se. It is located behind the oncology building that's in McMurray Business Park, and it's got a pond there. And the reason this one kind of piqued my interest is A, geography, and then B, there's $100,000 that was given to us as part of that plan development, meaning the McMurray Business Park entity had to give us $100,000 as part of their PUD, their agreement with the city of Casper in that development. So it's been earmarked, and it's really only to develop this particular geographic space with some sort of park. And the 100,000 sounds pretty attractive, but you know, as you'll see in your packet, we kind of listed out what, if you wanted to kind of, which is a worst case scenario, you know, if you want to put all the features in it with turf and fencing and irrigation system and all that stuff, you know, that you can quickly get to, you know, $750,000. So, you know, the 100,000 sounds great, but you know, maybe in the grand scheme of things, it isn't much. But it would be totally under. We take the direction from the council is to say these are the features we may think are necessary or not necessary. We just want to put together what we think would be everything that you would want to see, and then we could value engineer it from there. Or if council doesn't want to see any additional dog parks, or they want to see 3 or 4, or you want us to take a look at some different facilities, we are more than happy to do so. So with that, I guess I would just probably open it up for some discussion and we can talk about it.
Tim, do you know what the cost was for that McKenzie Park to construct that and to do off the top of your head? I know that's kind of just shot out of the blue.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I want to say it was around $350,000. So
That one was,
kind
okay.
of comes to mind.
Okay.
So it does have some nice features. It does have a pathway within it, which is fairly expensive, but there's no turf in it either. It is just mulch and pea gravel, which I will put the warning out there. Dog parks, as far as my year in this role, I probably get 30 complaints on dog parks to every 1 complaint I would have on a regular park. Meaning people really the dogs are hard on the facility. The good thing is they're getting used regularly. I mean, if you drive by Morad or Lake Mackenzie, I mean, they're busy. But the pea gravel gets knocked onto the walkways, which can create a trip hazard or some unsure footing. The mulch gets disarrayed from the wind and from the dogs, and they do take some upkeep too. So there is, I try to capture just briefly in the memo kind of some ideas as far as annual upkeep, what that kind of adds. We just base that on man hours, if you will, to go do some weed eating or cut the grass or refill doggy pot stations, that kind of thing. So I did forget to mention that piece. Thanks for
Right.
the question.
You partially answered it, so are there any other things that people complain about at the dog parks?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it has been all over the board. What you do find is that people really care for their dogs, which is really cool. But what comes with that is just about anything. But I would say a lot of the complaints that I would feel, just anecdotally, because we don't really track the nature of them, a lot of it is just based on the other dog owners and what they do and don't do with their pet. Meaning, the main one would be picking up after
My
your
dog's
pet.
a saint, but your dog is a problem.
So we do get the dog attack complaints, just like, hey, another dog bit my dog. We do get the most frequent though is there's a dog running around the park and they just let their dog defecate and left. We also get complaints where people would put them in Lake Mackenzie since it's a fenced area and just leave their dog in there. Like the owner, from what I can tell, just leaves the grounds or goes and does something entirely different with their dog just sitting in Lake Mackenzie in the fenced-in area. So the majority of them are along those lines, but there are also some maintenance issues that we do deal with on a regular basis, and it's on us. But it just is getting people out there, boots on the ground to take care of the issues as quickly as we can.
Well, I mean, we've got this down for direction requested. What is the direction you're looking for? On selecting locations, types?
Mr.
We can
Mayor.
have a conversation, but I don't understand the end goal.
Well, I think this is really us saying, if we're going to restrict people and require dogs to be on a leash, and people aren't using leashes in some of our parks, or many of our parks, maybe we can identify some places where they can legally do that to reduce the pressure and the unleashed dogs in all the other parks where people don't feel comfortable or don't want them unleashed. Did I say that right?
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind my adding to that, you've got a couple options to give us by way of direction this evening. Of course, you have the direction to say, hey, we'd like to think about this, potentially gather more information that you might feel like you're lacking, and we would certainly take that and ask for a deadline to come back and have this conversation again. The other thing you could say is we'll take staff's recommendation, which would be to create that East Side Park, expend those $100,000 that have been put into trust based upon the features that you would like to see, whatever that might be. So in my mind, those are the two directions that potentially we could hear this evening, but there really is no time frame, time sensitive issue this evening.
I mean, I'm good with developing that as it is, but with the rest of them, we'll need a budget to work with if we're going to make decisions on anywhere else in the city. I know there was another option of the river pathway. We've already got one on a river pathway, and you either love it or you hate it. I hate it, but people that bring their dogs there love it. So we can't consume all of our pathways to those, I don't think. But I would certainly vote for this one. And we've got the funding. The rest, we got to have the dollars to decide what we're going to do.
I agree with that, and I do agree that we need to develop this one because we have some money set aside. And I was thinking, if we're going to create a budget, we also got to look at, how many parks do we want? So I was thinking something along the lines of 3, one on the west, one on the east, one in the middle. Start with that and see what that would cost, and then designate which one specifically, or something along those lines. We just start out with three new dog parks, one in the middle, east, and west side of town, and
We can phase in the amenities too.
again, and phase in things. Figure out what it would cost. I think initially, obviously, a fence is the biggest thing, but beyond that.
Going around to the different dog parks with my own, talking to some of the dog owners, some of the things that they don't like about the undeveloped land is like the sticker dog owners. They to really take care of their dog, keep them groomed, getting the little stickers in them, especially one by the pump house. A lot of people say they won't go there because their dogs come out with stickers. One like at Verta James Park, I really like that idea because a lot of them want to take them to a grassy area and throw the frisbee, throw the ball, where they don't have to worry so much about that. One that I would like to look at the cost of, and of course it's in my area, but is the PV Park has the tennis courts. I'm kind of wondering from the tennis courts, there's already tables there, there's trees there, running just a fence almost all the way to where they put the restrooms, the outhouses, whatever. Just a fence in there. And I know that we kind of talked about breaking it up into 2 sections, so one turf gets messed up, switch, and stuff like that. But I'd be kind of curious to see the lighting's already there, everything's already there, other than a fence. And I'd kind of be curious about what that would cost. But anyways, I just know a lot of them, they want the grassy area. The undeveloped land, some of them enjoy taking their shorter haired dogs, but the ones with longer hairs or that they keep really groomed, they really don't like going to those places.
Other thoughts on what we should do, Steve?
Mr. Mayor, I guess this is a question for Mr. Cortez. Is there a certain amount of space that is would be best required, I guess, for a dog park itself? I mean, is there a certain amount of space you want to stay at or above?
So, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I looked into that because I had that very question, if there was any best practices, if you will. And there really isn't, so if you see in your packet, one of those things that we proposed, maybe a pocket park, which is something that would be fairly small, maybe just fit into somewhere along a trail or something that would just make some sense for somebody to do that. But if you have like a larger dog, it has a different requirement than say a smaller dog if you're going to throw something around for them to fetch or whatever. So the answer to your question is there's really no best practices. You need X number of acreage to really make sense of it. If you have it too small though, then you do run probably into issues where you have someone that's got a retriever or something and they say, hey, that really doesn't do me any good because I can only throw at 30 feet and that's not good enough to wear my dog down,
Right.
get some energy expelled.
What's your recommendation?
I would
You're not being put on the spot. You can't have a wrong one.
Well, first and foremost, I would say I serve this group, so whatever resonates with you is where my heart's at. I will say, going back, if you have me personally in a cost containment mode, which I still am in, my recommendation would be that we really hunker down and maintain what we currently have. But you also have the larger picture in the background, which is people, if we're going to require them to put on leash, just like the mayor said, that would be the trade-off, and so to me that puts me maybe in a different mode, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Walsh, I think I would add to what Councilman Court, geez, I gave you promotion. Way to go.
Must be the suit.
Way to go, it's a suit.
You don't want
Take
it.
your seat, yeah. Mr. Cortez said, I would recommend that we go ahead and move forward and build a fence with the $100,000 that has been set aside for that park on the screen, potential park on the screen. I like the idea of considering at budget time potentially phasing in amenities either for this facility or additional facilities that you might have an interest in. That way we can plan for it budgetarily and not have to come to you for amendments and those sorts of things in the interim. In the meantime, as you're considering that, if indeed you want to look at the model of one on the west, one in the center, and one on the east, potentially we would have the center and the east taken care of if you're comfortable with this idea, and we could look further into Paradise Valley or otherwise for a good solid west side location that we'd bring to you back in the budget
We
period.
have more at Park, but
Right.
even just maybe updating that park would help with costs as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
Well, fencing is listed at 40,000 on this idea, not 100,000.
Okay.
I'm listening to the $100,000 number and I'm thinking, for a fence?
That's a lot of fence.
Well, it's the government, right? I mean, well, I would vote to fence this at 40 grand and then do exactly what you said, look at the west side and I would say an additional park type instead of, because that, all these, when we start doing this, it relieves pressure on the ones that are existing now. Like Ken was saying, there's people with different desires. Instead of going into the prairie, they might want one.
Mike?
Well, I would certainly support going forward with fencing this, as Kristen said. You know, my personal feeling is to take the raw, undeveloped areas that we have and be fairly generous in designating some of them as dog parks, because some of them you can do literally with very, very little, you know, not just signage and those kind of things. I think it probably would be a good idea to try to pick out some fairly centrally located grassy area that people with what I would call foo-foo dogs can take their dogs on.
Like a knoll, like a grassy
Dallas
knoll.
dogs.
Dallas dog.
Yeah, Dallas could take that and run it
Dallas
around.
is going to grassy knoll.
Maybe he's listening to us.
Well, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this. People that aren't smart enough to have Labradors that shed all that stuff out of their hair.
Steve,
But,
did you ask? Oh, sorry, Mike.
But that's what I would think, is I think there are a lot of these raw undeveloped areas that to me would just, you know, kind of make sense as long as the dog's not chasing the deer or the antelope or the turkeys or anything else.
Did you have something else, Steve?
Yeah, one other question just on this by itself. So worst case scenario, $750,000 to do this, and like 600,000 of that, I'm seeing, or over that would be irrigation. Is there not, would there be an opportunity to use that? What's that?
40,000.
No, I know. But I'm looking to the future. If you're gonna develop this, would you be able to, that pond generally always has water in it. Is that something that we could just use for the irrigation itself? Or that might be outside of the scope of this, but just thinking ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I predicted that question. So it depends, and one of them would be the recharge rate, meaning, you know, if we put turf out there and we watered it, you can go through quite a few gallons, as the golf course is pretty good evidence of. So I can't really answer that question, because we probably need to know the recharge rate of what the pond is, and then we probably have to get a little bit better clarification on water rights or anything. You know, we need anyone further upstream in the McMurray ranches that sit up to the south, but it is very possible that we'd be able to use the water from the pond.
Chris?
We aren't causing a problem for ourselves designating that as a park. You see, because once we do that, it's a park. Anticipate any problems with expansion or any other use?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's a great question, because you're 100% correct. Once you initiate a service, it never goes away, and a park is absolutely in that arena. What I would say is the more feature rich you make a park, the more difficult it is to maintain those features over time. And so if at this point we're talking about fencing and the expectation of fairly minimal services, the long-term impacts are going to be more favorable from a financial standpoint. You may, once you put up the fence there, find that your constituents would say, hey, we do need this service to make it really appropriate for pets, and you might find that that's appropriate to do, whatever that might be. And from that standpoint, I would just ask that you remember that the more features you have there, the longer over time it is to maintain and keep up.
My question is, wouldn't any of these areas need to be zoned park historic before we could do this?
That certainly is something we can look into to clarify and make sure we're not running afoul of our own zoning ordinances, but I don't think so. I think with this particular piece of property, we have the flexibility to make it a recreational area, however you determine that should be defined. So in this case, I think we're in pretty good shape. In other instances, however, that you might see in your packet, we might have to do a little more homework.
And do we have notification requirements for people in a 300-foot surrounding area for I mean, I can imagine people, I'm not sure what those buildings are right there, but they're gonna have a lot of barking dogs that they're gonna have to deal with.
Those are
And
apartments.
Those are all apartments?
Well,
there?
there's apartments, yeah, those are apartments, and then
This is-
Rocky Mountain Oncology.
Yes.
Oh, that's, yeah, well, even there, you know, you've got people who
This is
are
Granite Peak.
there for cancer treatments and they, you know, may not appreciate hearing barking dogs while they're getting their medical services, so. I'm just,
Mr. Mayor, I think that that's a great point. We actually thought about that as we picked some of the sites, meaning, there was like a place, off of Meadowlark Hills, like kind of behind the Yamaha shop up there where there's some unused property. It's adjacent to a park, it's just kind of across the street. We thought of that because in that particular case, we could easily fence it off and it could easily become a dog park. The problem that we would probably find is that since it's adjacent to everyone's backyards, their dogs would be barking at those dogs. That one is in your packet, we put it in there, but that would be a caution with that particular area, to your point. And so I think just in the, probably just from a realistic point of view, I think it would make some sense, regardless if we were required to make an announcement or not. It would be a good idea as a good neighbor to go around and say, hey, here's kind of a proposed idea, do you take issue with it? This particular case, it is part of a PUD, so to me, I agree with the city manager. I think we're in pretty good shape with this particular piece of property. I mean, it was kind of planned from the get-go, this would be a park area, and that's where the 100,000 came from.
okay, so that was part of the land use plan.
And as far as I know, I think the oncology folks, which I believe is this structure here, it was kind of in the thought process that as people rehab and stuff, they could go walk a pathway in that park and stuff like that, but means that we'd be kind of changing that functionality. That vision may not be realized at the degree that both them and the McMurray Business Park folks might have anticipated, meaning we're not talking about a pathway in there right now, and we're also probably, it probably doesn't make sense to have people that are rehabbing, walking a path with dogs running around. It might be counterproductive to what they were thinking.
Just if I may, how loud does it get over in Mackenzie?
Loud.
Yeah, I thought so, so that's something to keep in mind, so. Kristen? What's it, did I miss anything?
If we fence the area, I mean, that's just a street. Would people be allowed to park on the street, or would there have to be like designated parking like within this area?
I guess that's up to us.
Okay.
And that is up to you, Mr. Mayor. We did you kind of see like a 2-track trail here, and kind of the initial thought, just we would take whatever direction you want to give us, would be is this space here could probably become a parking area, and then, you know, fence off, you know, kind of what you see with the blue line, but this part here could be some designated parking, if you will.
I'd be surprised if we didn't get some objections. You know, I'm not saying that's a rule out, but Chris?
Well, I mean, you've just changed my mind. As the part of the PUD and the business park idea and the oncology center being right there, and potential for going outside for walking around and enjoying the day after rehab, it is not a dog park unless you got your dog with you. So maybe our decision would be tentative on what the neighbors say and what Plan B is on the east side of town, or move it to the west side first. I just think if they develop that property with the intention of doing something there for the medical services that are provided all around it, we'd make a bad move if we jumped in the middle of that, contrary to the developers.
It's my sense, and I don't use either one of the dog parks because I don't have a dog, but that people drive significant distances to go to Murat and to Mackenzie. And if it's the right place for them to go, they'll go there. It doesn't have to be around the corner. I mean, I understand what you're saying, trying to make them geographically disperse, but it's probably more important, in my opinion, to pick the right area that doesn't have some complications, and give that to people as an option instead of using Washington Park and City Park and the other places that they're currently using. So you, Mike?
Well, I've never heard dogs barking out at Murat Park any of the times I've been here. They're running around and doing doggy things all over, but the barking I've never heard. Now, I can certainly understand that if you bought a dog park right up behind somebody's fence, then you're gonna have confrontations through the fence and that kind of thing, so that's a little bit of a problem. you know, maybe what we need to do here is just go out there to Rocky Mountain Oncology and ask, you know, ask those guys if they actually do have people, patients that go out and walk like that and everything. I had always had the impression out there that you just went there, you got your treatment, and then you went home. Now, I might be totally uninformed about that, but that would certainly make sense to ask them
Sure.
if they thought that would impact any of their operations. And that certainly might influence my support for that.
So we've got a budgetary problem if you wanna look at more than this area. And that, I guess we could talk about in May, if we want to see if we wanna put some money aside, if we can afford that, to create something. I mean, as I think about these things, I mean, the park boundaries generally suffice without a fence. We don't have a fence around Washington Park, we don't have a fence around City Park. And the dogs still stay within those areas because that's the park boundaries. So, I don't know how critical it is to have all these areas fenced.
Well, but we're not telling people they can run their dog around loose in Washington Park or City Park or anything.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if we picked one of these other areas and said this is now a dog park, I guess I don't know, but I don't think we should automatically assume it would only work if it's a fenced space. Chris?
Can I make a recommendation?
I guess we're looking for one.
I recommend we explore that piece of property there for, you know, just the fencing aspect. Future amenities can come down the road, but only after we hear what the surrounding businesses and neighbors have to say about it before we make a decision.
Yeah, I'm good with that as long as we keep this sort of on the table to look at some other areas down the road. Because again, I think if we're gonna put these restrictions in place, we need to offer the dog owners something in return. And so, and then I guess I would also hope that we would have some signage at our existing parks. I don't know how we would do this, where we would emphasize dogs must be leashed in this area. The areas where they don't need to be leashed are, so we can direct people to the proper areas. So,
Mr. Mayor, then if I could ask the question, is it council's direction also then to prepare some considerations for budget time that would suggest other areas geographically dispersed for consideration in April?
What's your recommendation, Kurt?
I would recommend that, yeah. I think that's a good idea to look at it from a service standpoint around the community. And thereby taking pressure off of Mackenzie and Murad and potentially here. I think it's a good idea.
I'm good with that.
okay, we all okay with that? Chris?
Well, maybe we should put an amount not to exceed, so we don't overinflate anybody's expectations. So can you, just off the top of your head, how big is that? How many acres?
That is about 8 acres total, but of course, you know, we would subtract out the pond, which is about 3 acres.
I just need the perimeter on it.
So you're
So it's
looking at
about,
about 5 acres total of turf area.
perimeter outside is gonna be within 8 acres though.
Yes,
So
correct.
fencing, $40,000 fencing for 8 acres. So if we said, we had 2 more, center and east or center and west, we said amount not to exceed $80,000 for the basic.
For this particular project. Sure. And I guess I would ask you guys to try to create maximum buffer between the existing buildings. You don't have to necessarily put the fence line right along the property line.
Absolutely. And nor does it have to be 8 acres necessarily.
Yeah, I imagine it'd be a lot less, but that should give us plenty of leeway to.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay?
How many acres is Morad, or not Morad,
Mackenzie.
Mackenzie?
Oh, I would probably say it's about an acre and a half. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
it's pretty small. This is a big chunk of land, and just for your edification, it's about $15 a lineal foot for fencing, 6 foot high. That kind of gives you a ballpark of what you'd be talking, say, at Paradise Valley Park or something. That was
All right, not to throw a wrench in everything you guys are talking about, but we've talked about parks where you said you don't have boundaries on most of the parks anyways. do we really need to fence 8 acres and make it a dog park? I mean, could we take a section of this, it might be the section on the south side of that pond, and make that the dog park, just fence that off by itself, and then the rest could be, just a regular park with no fence line, no boundaries. Then we're not spending 40 grand on fencing, we're just gonna section off, you can put that money elsewhere and pay for some other things to where we're not.
Give them the walkway that
Yeah,
they thought was
just,
gonna
and
be
just
right.
define a space, and if you do it on the
Perfect.
south side, then you are away from oncology, you're not bothering anybody, you're gonna back right up to McMurray's Ranch area anyways.
Could fence up to the pond and, so, on both sides.
Or even if you wanted to have a pathway that went all the way around the pond, just
Yeah.
stay off of that, you know,
Oh.
give enough space there for that, but you could still have several acres, I would imagine that could be all dog park, but a lot less money fence-wise.
Could you guys just look into that and come up with a proposal, Tim? Would that-
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, and I think it's kind of going along the lines of that pocket park concept, meaning we would have a trail that people could use, dog or no dog, and then we fit in something in a place that makes some sense with a couple acres for a dog park, I think.
Leashed, of course, in the pathway
Leashed on the
area.
pathway area, and yep, absolutely.
I think it sets a good precedent, and we're showing a good faith interest in providing something for the dog owners, while we're saying everywhere else, a leash. We're kind of done with all this off-leash stuff. Okay. Any other questions, comments for Tim? Are we good to move forward? Great. Thank you. Abandoned vehicles. Want to start us, Carter?
You betcha, I sure would. Mr. Mayor, Council, we have some inconsistencies in our ordinance relating to abandoned vehicles, and it's indicating some trouble with respect to enforcement and those kinds of things. Furthermore, there are housekeeping issues with regard to this section of ordinance that simply don't apply anymore, and fundamentally, we'd just like your permission to clean those things up, update the ordinance, and move forward in a perhaps more streamlined fashion as it relates to enforcement. The attorney's office, Mr. Chambers, and our chief have been working on those things, and I'd like to have them kind of walk us through some of those changes, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. It's our ongoing habit to take a look at our ordinances and find those that need updating. This is one that leaps out as we're trying to accomplish two things. First of all, over the last year, we've had multiple occasions where citizens have complained to us that they have a derelict vehicle that's parked in the roadway in front of their house or in the neighborhood, and that is posing a problem to them. For example, it's been there so long that the street sweepers had to go around it, and we now have a furrow of debris around it, and it's starting to sprout weeds, and there's an elm tree growing up through the hood. The problem that we run into is under the current ordinance, it specifically says that it not only has to be abandoned, but it also has to be not currently registered. And so people are registering their vehicles and still leaving it there. And so even just last week, we have a gentleman in the audience that was bringing this same complaint to me, and a little bit of frustration of, hey, I wish there was something we can do. So the main statutory change that we're asking for is to remove the requirement for it both to be abandoned and not currently registered, but to allow us some language that the investigating officer can use some common sense to say, boy, it's got a Siberian elm growing through the hood, it hasn't moved for a while. So that's the main statutory change. The rest of it is mostly cleaning up the ordinance. At my request, I wanted to remove the concept of police impound. We have not been impounding vehicles for quite some time. There's no longer a city impound lot for us to tow and seize vehicles to. When in the conduct of in the performance of our duties, we have cause to tow a vehicle, we summon a private tow company who then is responsible for storing it and getting it back to the owner, working with the owner to the retrieval of their property. So we removed all language that pertains to impounding and cause that to be just removal or towing. And cleaning up those areas that we just don't do anymore. We don't have that police seizure lot. So that when people call us up, hey, you seized our vehicle, that's generally not the case, with the sole exception of when we're serving a search warrant on it. Mr. Mayor, I would entertain any questions that council may have.
Questions for Chief? Ken?
I looked it over, but I just want to double check with you on it that if the owner's vehicle that is not registered is on their property, that wouldn't be an issue.
So those are ordinances that are covered under our code compliance sections. This is a parking ordinance that governs the use of the street.
Gotcha. I thought I just wanted to double check.
Chief, how do we define the word unattended? I think that's open to interpretation.
So again, the way we've drafted this language is to allow for an on-site review of it, to use common sense principles. For example, let me give you the example that was brought to me last week by a member of the audience tonight. The vehicle in question has had its seats removed. It's clear it's not drivable and hasn't moved for 4 months. That would be indicative of an unattended vehicle that has been intentionally left on our roadways. In the city of Casper, Mayor, and if I can add further to that, we have snow removal concerns. We have street cleanup concerns, and quite frankly, an abandoned, unattended vehicle can be an eyesore or it can be a detriment to the neighborhood. There are legitimate public safety concerns and quality of life concerns in us bringing these changes forward.
I'm glad you're looking at this because I remember coming up with that problem before about they've licensed a vehicle but it hasn't moved. But you don't see a need for, is there any definition of it hasn't moved in X number of days or anything like that to make it crystal clear that?
So again, what I would tell you is, and I'm going from memory, I thought there was.
So 5 days or something.
Yeah, there is a time limit. So if you're driving down the road and your car breaks down, we're not immediately jumping on that. And I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I
So-
think we have people who would think that that's what you want to do. I mean, we know you don't, but.
So I'm sorry. Now I remember. Thank you for reminding me. As is always, the police department, our primary goal is compliance, not enforcement. So we are naturally going to be inclined to researching and contacting the owner. Hey, this is a potential problem. Can you please move it, prior to us getting to the point where we're ticketing it and ultimately towing it from the scene. Our goal is compliance, not enforcement.
Any other questions for Chief?
Well, Chief,
Mike?
I have a question here. This 10.60.080 still talks about inoperable and not currently registered or showing other indicia of not being able to move.
So we've allowed the language to stay the same, and we've added the additional that says, or we can consider these things.
Okay. So the first part is inoperable and not currently registered, and then next provision is or shows other indicia, blah blah blah, tree growing out of tires or.
So Mayor, Councilman Huber, I would recommend to you that the first part of that is inoperable and not registered would be the prima facie evidence that it meets this definition.
Right.
Then we've thrown in there, or given these other facts that are articulable, that are reasonable to infer, that it's also can be deemed to be.
Yeah, I think I misunderstood at first that you were taking out the registration thing on everything, but you've explained it. I understand it now. You did a good enough job that even I can understand it.
That's the first time I've seen the word indicia. Have you been consulting with former Mayor Sandoval?
Is that a word? Is that your question?
Indicia is
It's a joke for
common
those
to
of us.
law enforcement. So. Any other questions?
Other question for Chief?
Thank you for your time.
Are we good with making this change? Okay, thank you. Wow, are we actually ahead of schedule? How about that? The next one is mine, and I just wanted us to kind of step back and look at our work session process and get input for any suggestions for how we use this time. It could be a very brief discussion if everyone's satisfied with how we've been doing things and want to just move forward. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how we prioritize our time, how we can be more efficient, and how we should set our agenda. Part of the reason for me bringing this up is that for me personally, I'm not comfortable with how the grid has been formulated, where council really hasn't been involved in establishing the agenda for the work sessions, that we pretty much delegated that almost entirely to our staff. And if people feel like that's worked fine, I'm okay with that, we can continue that. But it seems to me that it's our meeting and maybe we should have a little more involvement in what goes on the agenda and how it gets on the agenda. We talked a little bit at one point about everything needing a sponsor on council. I think that probably would be a good thing to talk about again. But I don't really have a set way to go about this. We set aside 60 minutes, maybe it'll last 6. I don't know. But this would be a time for people to just kind of talk about how do you want to use this time. Chris?
Oh, I think everything you said is spot on. So I think that when we get to the agenda or go around the table for the agenda, that should be a informal approval of that upcoming agenda. And of course, the staff's going to have things that are day-to-day maintenance that need to be put on there or last minute. But and that can be handled outside the regular deal. But typically, we know what's ahead of time. I think we should give an informal approval, go through it, and name them. We don't have to go through each one of them because they're set for future discussion. And I think that the meeting should be set for no more than 90 minutes, and you keep it within 90 minutes. We'll expand it to whatever time we need, or we'll stay it down to business.
I think it would be difficult to make changes for the week following the meeting that we're in, because there's so much preparation that staff has to go through to get ready for the next meeting. To me, it would make more sense for us to be planning the work session after next,
Okay.
which is a little more fluid, and maybe we can look at some of the things on the grid that are on the back of the grid to be discussed and say, we would like this one to be on the agenda 1 month from now, as opposed to having staff be in the position to make all of those decisions for us. So, other thoughts about how to do this?
Some of these things, I think, we don't typically have them, but like the dog park area. We could have a work session, a full work session once a month, and we could split this thing into committees that dealt with particular things and just work that one issue during that time. Say, take one person from each board and give us 2 other rooms. It wouldn't have to be big. Tim could come in and all this stuff we were talking about, we could line out and then come in and have a formalized process instead of trying to put it together. Because look at the way that thing evolved, and it ultimately came down to Steve's recommendation of, well, wait a minute, that's 8 acres. None of us even realized that. And he's right. So that problem could have been solved, and it could have been presented pretty easy if there is that situation. The animal ordinance, the parking ordinance, or the tow ordinance isn't that big a deal, but some of those could be.
So to have a subset of council work on it. That's
And bring
that
in
would be a big change. I mean, we wouldn't have any public notification, but I'd be worried about the perception that maybe some decisions would be made.
But why wouldn't it be public notification?
Well,
It would just be these guys are talking about this in this conference room. I'm not saying hide any of it. It would just be on the agenda
We'd break up into groups to work on separate problems.
if there was something, yeah.
reactions to that? Kristen?
I mean, ultimately, you might still run into it being long in this session, though, because what if an individual who wasn't on that subset of the committee, like, you know, the subset brings forward a recommendation, say Steve hadn't been in the subset, and then they bring forward that recommendation, and Steve's like, hold on, like, we're talking about 8 acres, like, why don't we break that out? So, I mean, I guess I would just get almost worried that the people who weren't in the, would basically still change the flow of the discussion once we brought it back to the group as a whole. I'm not saying that would always happen or ever happen. It just,
you're
it
probably
could
right.
happen.
Could try it, Mike?
Well, because I think the way that we've kind of been functioning is somewhat as a committee of the whole instead of subcommittees. If we want to delegate out committees that, you know, okay, this committee's in charge of leisure services, this one's public works, this one's you know, public safety or something like that. You know, we could do that, but the problem, like Kristen was saying, is that, you know, you'd have not only that committee work, but then you'd have to bring everybody else up to speed on it. That could potentially be a problem. I think that's a separate issue, though, than what you're talking about, than your other issue, Mr. Mayor, about the need, you know, the council setting the agenda rather than just really relying, and the staff's done a great job of, you know, putting things on the agenda and bringing them forward. Do we want to keep doing it that way, or do we want to take up that responsibility ourselves? That's a question. And if you want to sit there and say, well, before anything comes up for any discussion, it has to be sponsored, you know, basically there has to be a motion and a second or something like that. It has to be sponsored by some council member before it comes up for discussion. That's, you know, those are all three different kind of things. And I think it's very worthwhile to be talking about them and trying to decide what is the best, most efficient way to move things along and to cover stuff. But seems to me like we should talk about those things one at a time, kind of.
A couple of things I've been kicking around is, and again, just to get some reactions. It's not uncommon for a meeting like this for people to begin by saying, do we approve the agenda for tonight? And we could actually go around and people say, I have something else that I think we should be addressing. Well, maybe we wouldn't have time that night to do it, but we would put it, if 5 people said, yes, we need to talk about that, we'd put it on this list here. And then we could, at some point, say, what are we going to do at the next meeting after this? And say, are we going to pull some things off of here and put them on the agenda? And then if something like the chief's concern was brought, and Carter said, you know, we have this concern about abandoned vehicles, we'd like to have a discussion about that in the work session, everybody would say, sounds good, we probably need to do that. Then it would end up on that list too, and somebody on council would maybe sponsor that and say, yeah, I think that's a good thing for us to be talking about. And then we would be the ones deciding which work session we discuss that topic. And we would look to see if we can keep it within 90 minutes, because as we know, we've had times where things got pretty lengthy because it just wasn't reasonable how much we were trying to get done. But what that would mean is, if we did this, is that this agenda would be set, but we would start creating the ones that aren't set. Maybe this would take a little while to put in place because it's already pretty well lined up. But we would be the ones then starting to fill in well, we've got a work session on February 26th where there's one item on it right now, the Plains RFP. And we could put other things on there as we decided to prioritize them. So, but again, that's
Let's give it a shot.
just floating ideas. So do you have any comments on how to go about this, Carter? Because you've been doing this for a long time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I definitely am appreciative of council having a more active role in determining the time frame with regard to the issues, and in particular, the section of the grid that is relating to future work session items. Sometimes the difficulty that we run into that you should be aware of is in our quest to prepare for the item, with periods of information gathering, we often can run into difficulty. A good example would be the event center audit. We've been wanting to bring that audit forward to you as a follow-up to going on a year and a half now of the dialogue relating to how the audit's functioning. We had set a time frame at one point in time before the end of the year to bring it forward. Unfortunately, for issues beyond our control, the auditors don't have it done yet. And so we would then run into the difficulty of coming to you and saying, hey, we're not ready, or finding out even maybe a couple days before, oh geez, it's not ready. We're not ready to bring it for public discourse. And so I would ask that you have some consideration with regard to that challenge, and while it doesn't happen all the time, it does happen, and the opportunity to work that out with you would be helpful.
Chris?
I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I also like that, I would like it to be scheduled and then an explanation. If it's, we just didn't, well, that's an issue to address, or things came up, because they do come up. So then you can track a process as it's going.
Perfect.
Or we pulled it and delayed it. There's a grid that shows what's in the works, where it's at, why it's stalled, or whether it's not stalled and it's on track and it just takes time.
And the other thing that I've seen happen is, it gets to be 8 o'clock, 8:15, and we go around the table and people finally get a chance to say, I've had some constituents talking to me about X. Well, we're kind of ready to go home at that point. And people aren't really in a mood to say, well, let's add that to our work session agenda. And so it just sort of disappears. And so I'm wondering if maybe we shouldn't do that earlier in the meeting so that people can say, since we last met, here's a couple of things I think, really the city needs to talk about, and how about we see if council wants to add that to the work session agenda. If we get 5 thumbs up, then it goes on the list.
I think that's a good idea. I also absolutely would like it that when we say, Tim, give us some ideas on a dog park, and we all go home. So you're going to come up with every idea that we might come up with and try and pin that one to the wall, right? I would like the staff to feel completely comfortable saying, fair enough, got something in mind. So he doesn't spend half a week trying to put together any of the wild ideas we might come up with, or Liz has to do the same thing when we're coming up with a RFP for something. So feel free to ask clarifying questions that streamline your work.
And the other thing that might be helpful, Carter, is I'm sure when you guys are having your meetings and you're trying to decide, well, where are we going to put this item? Some of those things are fixed because there's deadlines that you have to deal with, or we finally got to the point where something's ready to present and you want to get it done because we've been waiting. But I would guess there's other decisions that are a little more fluid.
Absolutely.
Where you're kind of saying, well, I guess we could, how about we do that? Well, maybe those kind of questions should be brought in here rather than you guys, because we all know that once something like this is created, you tend to just go with it. That's just how we are, and it's not something where you question it because it's all written down. And so if we don't have it laid out like it is now, because we've got it, all the way through the middle of March right now, and we're a little more open-ended, then some of those fluid decisions could be involved with this group rather than made in your office or in your conference room. So how would we practically go about this? Would you like to go around the table earlier in the meeting and start with that?
I would agree with that. Because then when we're done, we're done. Also, you know, the way we typically, if it's a council initiated work session topic, it's done, you know, on the around the table portion, either out there or in here, where, you know, I've got this issue I think we should talk about, you get 5 votes, it goes on the agenda. I think it works fine, you just need to, like you said, sit down and prioritize. I think that's the biggest issue. 'Cause I've had when I first got on council, I have had my ideas put on the list and then it just sits there. So, I think that's the bigger issue.
And it certainly would be okay with me, and I assume everyone else, if someone had a very important issue that was sitting on the back, and we go around at the beginning of the meeting for somebody to say, my thing's still sitting there. How much longer is it gonna sit there? So, Kristen, do you want to say something?
My only concern with having it at the front is, we'll drag these things out sometimes, and maybe it's necessary for us to get a better understanding of it, or we don't have anything else to do that evening. People putting all this stuff together do have something to do, and the people, if we ask outsiders to come in here and present something, then they're waiting on us. And I know, I really appreciate what you're doing, making these more efficient. We aren't always, and I don't want to add any more aggravation to the city staff that wouldn't have to be here if we're thinking things up.
If we did this, we would have to have the discipline to say there's a difference between bringing up something and saying, I think we should discuss this in a work session, and launching into the discussion, which
Okay,
I've seen happen a number of times.
I agree
And
with
that's my job, to kind of say, this isn't the time we're gonna talk about this. It's going to happen at this later meeting. So, I guess we could try it, and if it does, you know, inconvenience people or whatever, but I would hope if we did this, the first item would be a council around the table, and it would say 10 minutes. And we would try to go around the table in 10 minutes.
What if we just stop at 10, whether everybody's done or not? We gotta put the hammer down, right? On ourselves. We're only talking about discipline ourselves.
I mean, it also, you have to do like individual time, because otherwise if we always start with the same person, like 2 people are gonna go through and the other 7 don't ever get to talk, so you'd have to do like, maybe like per person, like.
1 minute
Yeah.
talk per person is 9 minutes.
Well, but we should have some discipline that,
Two.
you know, I got something that's really, really important, pressing, that, you know, that I think we need to talk about versus, yeah, this is something that we can put off until, you know, a week or 2 from now. You know, we gotta trust that we'd have some discipline there.
I mean, to me, all these things are just things to try. And we can always backtrack and say, you know, we played around with this and things are just unraveling. Let's go back to what we were doing before.
Well,
Were you waiting?
No.
and I really think that we need to trust the mayor to be able to shepherd us along through some of these things. You see things just wandering off all over the place, you know, get your whip out.
Well, you know, again, just a kind of a proposal. We could go forward to the work sessions that are not completely scheduled, where there's, you know, a few things in there, but, and we could then have a discussion about what things should be added to that agenda. And Carter, you would obviously be involved in that because, you know, staff's been working on some things, or some things are coming forward and you're not quite ready to put it on there. And we would just, you go around the table and then do the agenda planning rather than the agenda review for a specific work session. Maybe we would say, okay, tonight we're gonna plan the work session on February 12th. Is that a full session, or should we be adding things to that agenda? And if everybody looks at it and says, that's probably good just the way it is, then we leave it, okay? And then the next time we have a work session, we would do the same thing with February 26th. So that we're looking at specific agendas and formulating them as we go along.
Mr. Mayor, am I understanding correctly then that council would be comfortable with a proposed topic list for, say, February 12th, so that you would have the opportunity to consider it, but you wouldn't be necessarily in the dark with regard to some of the timing issues that we'd be facing, et cetera.
Yes, for me, I'm fine with that. A way we could do this, and again, I haven't really, is rather than put it on the agenda, we could have a list of topics with a proposed date next to them, and we
Okay.
could play around with those dates.
Yeah, let's do that.
And so that, for example, February 12th, you might pull all of those items off and put them on a list with February 12th next to those particular items.
Okay.
And then have the February 26th items below that with February 26th as the proposed date. And then we could start shuffling the dates, the items around as we wanted to prioritize them. And then you might say, well, we really need to do this thing on the 12th because of X, Y, and Z. And we would all shrug our shoulders and say, okay, that stays on the 12th.
Give it a try.
That way, the work session agendas are pretty unscheduled, or they're unscheduled until we put things on there. Is that, Fleur, you're gonna doing some of this, right? What questions would you have as far as direction from us?
I think what Claire's already indicated, and what you've been talking about, basically, yes, it'll be the clerk's office who's working on the grid and whatever you all decide to do, but
Because I don't know who actually
we'll follow Claire.
who actually creates this. Is that,
That is my office.
that is yours, okay.
All right, Mr. Mayor, if I might add to, this really is the raw work product that the city staff uses to map out all of the timing concerns, all of the follow-up requests that you've made, and following ordinances through their processes, et cetera. So you've got the roadmap for exactly how we try to lay out everything to make sure we're in compliance with the timeliness of issues and follow-ups and everything else. And so for us, it's not hard to create a list, but it would be certainly less detailed than what you would have here, if that's what I'm hearing you say correctly.
Well, again, since I'm the one bringing up just certainly one thing, Ray, what I would see is that it would be pretty well hardwired for the next work session right now. Because it'd be too difficult for you guys to, but it's the one after that we can talk about.
Okay.
So, Rick?
Yeah, the only thing I want to say, and I agree where you're coming from, I just want to make sure that we're not gumming up the process too, where the city staff is trying to get things put through the pipeline and what we're trying to do. I mean, I think we can look at that and say, but I think we need to be really cautious and make sure that we're communicating, well with the city staff and making sure. I think that's a good opportunity if we can do that in this setting too, that we're doing that as well.
So if we did try this, then the agenda would start with around the table, and then agenda, not even an agenda review, agenda planning would be the right word for it, I think, the term for it. And then we would, and then I think we probably make sense to say agenda planning for a specific work session date. And we may look at the proposed dates and all shrug our shoulders and say, that sounds good. And then then we would go ahead and create this for that date. If that makes sense.
One more clarifying question, if you don't mind. Is it my understanding then that council would not need this anymore, or it'd just be a list of the topics with suggested dates?
It would be, well, okay. In my thinking about it, it would be hardwired for January 29th. That would be unchanged.
Okay.
When we went ahead to February 12th, we would simply have the agenda planning. We had council on the table, agenda planning, and then there would be a list of topics that would include restricted parking areas, island annexation, Cedar Springs. Next to that, it would say proposed date, February 12th. And then there would be the same thing for February 26th, with the only item that would be optional would be the Plains RFP, and that would say February 26th. And then we would take other things that came from around the table, or things from the back of the sheet that have been waiting, or things that you've brought up from your staff that are concerns, and we would start plugging them in essentially 4 weeks in advance.
I was gonna say 4 weeks in advance. I think I understand, thank
So the work product would still be the same, it would just be all these optional, I guess you call them optional items, would be in a list for us to give staff direction as to which session to plug them into.
you. Very good.
Is that, it's worth trying?
Oh, yeah, I want to give it a try.
We're talking about how to do work sessions, obviously, and so.
A lot of stuff we assign to you.
Are we being clear about what, from this point forward? Okay, let's just try it, and then next work session, we would, I guess if we're gonna do 4 weeks in advance, we wouldn't mess with the 29th. On the 29th, we would start creating the agenda for the 26th of February, 4 weeks beyond.
Right.
And nothing would change in this document until the 26th, where basically you would take the Plains RFP off and have that in the list of topics to be discussed, and it would have the 26th as the proposed date. And then all the other topics, we would start attaching dates to them. Or if, again, things came from the round the table or from Carter, we'd start popping them in. And it'll either work good, or it'll be a disaster, or something in between.
Let's give it a shot.
All right, let's try it.
Thank you.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes you guys have felt like maybe it would be nice to know the council wants it, the way it's being done. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and I think the thing that it offers us as well is the kind of a protection, so to speak, with regard to council members feeling like their issues aren't being addressed, or that they're purposely being left out for whatever reason, and so on. And we would enjoy that direction and feedback and that kind of thing.
All right, well, let's just try it and see how it goes. So.
Perfect.
All right,
Sounds
the
good.
other things, and then feel free, since I may overlook this, if we want to get be consistent about having a council member sponsor each thing on a work session, feel free to remind me that we need to have a sponsor for this, and we'll put a name next to each one or in parentheses after each one. And we've done better with that, but we've missed a few. So, okay. Executive sessions. I don't remember what we were going to. Do you remember what we were talking about with that? As far as just clarifying what they're used for, is that?
This gives me an opportunity, if I might take advantage of it. We do have new folks around the table who ostensibly have never been in an executive session, and I'm sure you'll find that it is a treat. The reality is executive sessions are pretty critical discussions because they give us an opportunity to talk frankly and candidly about personnel items, about land acquisitions, about potential litigation, potential security issues, and so on. I say so on. That really is it. Those are the real major issues that we ever deal with. The thing I would have you remember, particularly for the new council members, is that those are topics and forums that are protected by statute and do not allow for discussion outside of that forum. And so the caution I would give you is that when you enter into those discussions, walking in there with the understanding that discussion on those matters outside of that forum can lead you to personal liability potentially. And so, understand that, have that in memory, if you will. And two, we would like you to review those minutes that are often handed out on purple paper to be sure they're reflective of what you remember about those discussions. And when they aren't, we need to talk about those alterations, and we probably need to do that in executive session as well to be sure that they're appropriate and indicative of what we talked about.
And would it be correct to say that not only is it an option for us to discuss certain things in executive session, but that it is legally required for us to discuss certain things in an executive session?
I would certainly say that if there are times when council asks a question that would be better dealt with in executive session, generally speaking, the attorney would warn you that you're waiving your right to have this in a protected conversation. I'm sure my wording is not as eloquent as yours, Mr. Henley.
Which is fine.
And so, council has that to consider from time to time.
And maybe just to clarify, I guess everybody knows this, but I mean, the reason we do a litigation in an executive session is that if we have that discussion in public, we've essentially empowered the opposition by telling them in a public session what our stance will be and what our tactics will be in that litigation. And with property acquisition, if that is done in a public session, it changes the values of the properties. And with personnel, obviously, we have a requirement to protect the reputation of people that we could be talking about that if we talk about it in a public session, we could embarrass or even expose ourselves to a lawsuit from someone. So that's why those protections are in state statute. So
Can I add something else to that, Mr. Mayor? You will find that when we go into executive session, when we come out of executive session, we take real specific, oftentimes viewed as mundane exercises to get us in and to get us out. Those are driven by statute as well as case law, if you will, that dictate those efforts. And so while they may be frustrating and seemingly monotonous, it is helpful for us to get motions and to get appropriate closings. We oftentimes have to go back out onto the floor and say we now adjourn our meeting and so on. Generally speaking, the attorney and the clerk script those very carefully so that we don't find ourselves in violation of those directives. And so, again, probably more for the newer council people, it is monotonous and oftentimes repetitive, but really, really critical that we follow it to the T, and the clerk and the attorney guide us through that very effectively.
And executive sessions are always events driven. It's always circumstances that drive us into an executive session. It's my hope and expectation that we will have very few of them over the course of the year. We'll do everything we can to keep them to a minimum.
That's right.
Okay, cell phones. Thought it'd be good to talk about this because we tried an experiment where several people on council requested to have city cell phones. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the usage of those phones was pretty minimal for the most part. I never requested one. And so what do people think we should do as far as council having cell phones? Has it been helpful?
I used it as mayor, and I had it as my main contact number.
You did?
I did. And so, but I turned mine back in, because I'm not gonna get the volume that I had, so I just didn't see the need for it.
But it was helpful for you to have one.
But for me, it was helpful. It may not be for other people though, too, so.
Okay. Chris?
I never got one. My phone number's listed on the website, my cell phone number, and I don't have any issues.
I've been hesitant to do that, but it didn't really create a problem.
Mine's been up since I got elected, and
Okay. Well, I got a cell phone and my personal phone on the city website.
Okay.
I use my personal phone more than I use. I'll probably turn mine back in too, because I really don't use it.
well, I mean,
I think
using
Bob
city
was
funds
next.
and everything.
Yeah, never took one, don't need one. I do happen to have a cell phone in my pocket today,
Does it got a flip on
but
it?
that's a first for about 2 months.
It's got a crank.
So mine, yeah, I got a crank phone at home, and it actually has a little machine that listens to you. So I don't know that, I would rather save the money, quite honestly.
Mike?
I got one, I thought it'd be something that I'd wanna use, I haven't used it hardly at all. I'd be happy to turn it in and just put my home phone on this thing for contacts.
I'm assuming the intention behind it was maybe on the off chance that a phone conversation was had or whatever was taking place. I mean, obviously if it's on your personal cell phone and things go south and whatever it may be, a constituent's like, well, she said this and she threatened me, or then all of a sudden that entire personal cell phone is now exposed. And so, I mean, and for those of us who have confidential work information, I mean, that is a potential risk. I mean, I can't have my members' financial information being exposed because I had a conversation that was misinterpreted or whatever. I'm just saying, I guess, I'm assuming the original reason there was separate cell phones was to protect that.
I think it was more along the lines of emails, because people would link their personal phones to their city email, and then they'd have their phone subpoenaed and taken. So I would just suggest not linking your city anything to your personal cell phone, and just use the iPad that was given.
It was harassment too.
Mm-hmm.
Canine and Amanda.
Well, and we had a problem with people exchanging a lot of text messages about city business. And I would recommend that we all agree that that's not a good practice.
Yeah.
So, did you have something else? Mike?
Well, the only other thing I was gonna say is, like most people, but I might even be more to the extreme, I carry my cellular phone everywhere, because that's how I get fire department notifications and all that stuff, so it's stuck to me all the time. I didn't wanna have people calling me all of the time, talking about, you know, whatever, you know, I kinda wanted to try to channel that a little bit, but, I don't think that's been that much of a problem, and so I'm happy to bring mine back and turn it back in. It sits there uncharged up most of the time.
And I assume in the orientation you all talked a little bit about the open meetings law and email conversations and texting. If we do an all text and people respond to that, we've essentially had a meeting that wasn't announced. So we can't do that. So
We did.
okay. All right. Anything else we need to talk about housekeeping stuff and how to go about doing this? Any other thoughts on how to be more efficient with our time, or?
Mr. Mayor, can I add something? There are times when your city employee would like to, your city employees, I should say, would like to get some time with you that often aren't available. Judge Lund is one of those, and in fact, she would like to come in this evening during the roundtable and go over a couple follow-up things that she believes you've asked her to do. She doesn't plan on taking much time, and so I've suggested that as a means of being able to visit with you.
Okay.
Is that an appropriate use of that particular time for either her or myself or the attorney as your direct
During
employees to do?
The council around the table?
Sure.
Time? Particularly if we're gonna do it at the front of the meeting, so people don't have to wait till the end of the meeting to talk to us. Or it can just go on the agenda as an agenda item.
I would say put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
On the agenda, okay.
And I mean, I think we can always make ad hoc decisions, so that if you came in and said, we have something that we need to do tonight, and it's time sensitive, we'll just do it. As long as 5 people say, yeah, let's take the time to do that, we'll make time for it.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing else that we need to talk about with that, let's get on to boards and commissions, because we have a number of assignments that need to be taken care of here. So let's, get that out. schedule and my council schedule didn't line up very good today, so. Let's see, where's that? Here we go. Okay. So, what I'm looking at is this document. Does anybody else have a copy of that with them? Okay. So, I'm not sure how to go through this best, Carter. We've got the, well, let's just start at the top. We have the City County Hall of Justice Committee. Chris, you're still on that.
Yes.
And Caneen was on that. Are we required to have 2 people?
It's a JPB, I think we are.
How often do you meet?
Very, very seldom. To the point that I can't tell you what the scheduled meeting dates are. It's less than quarterly, problem driven. And it's on a Wednesday. It would have been today, I'm sorry. Would have been Tuesday, 3rd Tuesday of every month, but
They just call it when they need it?
there might have been 2 this last year.
Thank you.
Okay.
What time?
It's 10:30 or something like that.
Okay.
Is it usually done by lunch, council?
It's usually done within a half hour. Just to give you an idea, that it will be, the basement's flooding, we need a new roof at the jail, failing generator, and it's going in approval for the repair of that particular item, and then we're wrapped up. It's 2 meetings. It's the Hall of Justice and the jail. It's 2 meetings separated by the protocol of closing one out and going to the next one. So,
At the same time, essentially.
yep.
Okay. And what we're trying to do is divide these responsibilities up in some equitable manner, and also make sure that the ones that we're legally required to have a presence at, that we have enough people for those. And then maybe we'll look at some of these and say we don't really need a council person. So, anybody care to volunteer to be Chris's partner on this?
You know, it might make some sense for me to do that. Like that.
I'm willing to do that.
Probably not as much familiarity with some of that as Chris, but a fair amount.
Okay. Is someone,
Jolene's
have you got that, Jolene? Okay.
Thank you.
Municipal Court Coordination Committee. Sean, you're on that, and Dallas was on that. How often do you meet?
Whenever they need us to meet. I think I've met maybe 3 times since I've been on council, and it was mostly interviews for hiring new judges. And then we would bring a recommendation forward to council, or if the judge needs to meet for anything specifically. But again, I think that's happened once.
Kind of a liaison almost for the judges.
I'd like to do that.
Okay. All right, we've already got you on water board too, Mike. So.
Yeah.
All right.
That doesn't meet hardly ever.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I like food and I like hardly ever.
Okay. All right, Public Safety Communication Center. I know nothing about what that involves. Caneen was our representative on that. I don't know how many meetings she attended or what that consisted of.
Ms. Caneen?
Caneen was the only one that's listed here.
Mr. Mayor, they meet periodically as well. I think it's a little more structured than on an as-needed basis. But certainly those who have some information relating to the center and how it works. As you all know, that's a regional center. We have regional partners throughout the county that participate. And typically we've only had one assigned to that group.
Okay.
I volunteer for that. Things, I used to run it and build that center, so.
That's right. See how these things work out? Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, Council Finance Committee, this was one you were interested in, right, Kristen? And we have to replace both Jesse and Caneen, so are we required to have 4 members?
Mr. Mayor, we would be open to 3 if, or even 2, if that would be helpful to the council to spread the burden a little bit. But we would like to utilize that committee more than we have. And so I'm hopeful that we can meet more frequently than we have in the last 18 months.
Yeah, because that's when we haven't met very often either.
Right.
I think with an audit, we met once, when we went through the audit.
And that's a big part of it,
That's
yeah.
pretty much, the biggest thing that we really
Are we okay with just three?
Well, it's the
Who
committee
all
order.
is on
This
it?
is
So
a
it's
list of,
Bob,
like, who
Sean,
wasn't.
Jesse, and
It's not
Keneen.
council.
And so if Christian joined, we'd have
The finance
three.
committee's
You
on
stayed
this.
on it,
Yeah,
and
I'll
Bob
stay.
stayed on
I'll
it.
stay on it. I'm good with three.
Does that work?
I'm good with three.
Okay. Economic Development Joint Powers.
So who
Board.
did we get? I'm sorry.
Okay,
we got,
Kristen, Bob, and Sean.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Economic Development Joint Powers Board, we currently have Bob and Ray.
I've been on there 4 years, so if there's something that would be interested in going to EDJP, I'd be willing to do that. I don't have to, I have not been able to go to the last few ones, and especially when I was member, so I'd be willing to, if anyone wants to do EDJP.
What's the requirement on that?
Second-
Quarterly.
Second Thursday at 10:30.
They meet pretty faithfully.
Yeah. And they're really good.
I'll join you on that, Bob, unless someone else is really interested in doing that.
Yeah, I'd like to stay, so.
All right. I'll stay with that. Or join that. Leisure Services Advisory Board, Mike, you said you were interested in that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're trying to take them all.
Just give them all the mic.
Well, let's,
And they really, you know, having served on that board for 10 years, they really do appreciate having somebody there. And so, and I hope that's the case for all of these assignments, that people say they can do it, that they're committing to attend. And so, you wanna be on the leisure board there?
Yeah,
You'll
actually,
enjoy it.
yeah.
It's very uplifting. You get to meet a lot of great people that are volunteering to do things in the community, so. All right, CATSI. Keneen was our CATSI rep. Any volunteers to take that one? And that meets the fourth Monday at 2 p.m. at the Senior Center. Not all at once. Okay. And we can defer some of these until later. People need some time to think about it, so. All right, let's just leave that one open for now, Jolene, and we'll bring this up again later. Central Wyoming Senior Services, Keneen was also our rep on that, and that meets the second Wednesday at 2 p.m. unless they've changed it.
Was it the second Wednesday?
Second Wednesday at 2 p.m.
Why don't you put me on that, Charlie, now that
Okay,
I'm
right.
off at EDJP?
Okay. Casper Housing Authority. They meet every third Thursday at 10:30.
We'll try to do that.
Okay. I think you'll find that pretty interesting, Ken. They do a lot.
Unless you wanted to.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, youth empowerment. And Ray, you've been
I'd like
doing
to stay
that.
on that.
You wanna stay on that? Okay.
Unless somebody wants to fight me for it. Mike.
He just wants leisure.
K2 Morning Radio Show, I guess that becomes mine now, so.
That's you.
All right. CNFR, Chris, you wanna keep doing that?
I would like to stay on that, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else like to join it? We can always have one other person on there if you'd like to, Steve, okay?
So this thing is set up by, is it MOU between us and the county, that it's a 4-person, 1-director board with kind of advisory positions? You can certainly go.
But we only have one vote, then, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. So, optional then, I guess.
Good.
But we sure can list you as a member of the committee, you just want to be voting.
First Monday of every month at Kim's place, the title in the Ohio building.
Oh, okay. First American.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, travel and tourism, now Steve, you expressed some interest in that too, and then you've been doing that, Sean.
I would like to stay if I could.
Okay. Is that one where we could add a person to?
So there's one, I think one council member, and then the city appoints another, So it's a joint powers board. They got the county, Midwest, Edgerton, Evansville, Mills, city of Casper, they're all appointed by the various governments to be on the board.
It's the same thing as the CNFR then, where you have a voting position basically. Well, I guess we could do the same thing if you wanted to attend, Steve, and that way if you couldn't come for some reason, Steve.
Right,
could
yeah,
be
I can
there.
have a proxy, proxy. If I can't make it, then somebody could step in.
And where would
I think they're the fourth Monday. And that even depends, because sometimes they get changed, but usually they're,
It says fourth Tuesday at 11:30.
or Tuesdays, I'm sorry, yeah, fourth Tuesday, 11:30 at the, office downtown, no, visitor center, CACBB downtown. And even then, though, sometimes those have changed. If the board decides they want to do a meeting on the third Tuesday or second Monday, then sometimes that does happen, so it just depends.
Okay, so we'll list both of you now, okay? Regional water system, so Chris and me and Sean and Keneen were on that. We are required to have 4.
I'm fine with staying on it.
And you can, and Mike, you volunteered to do that too, right? So we need a 4th volunteer to come every third Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. They do serve lunch, if that matters to people. So can we get a volunteer?
It's pretty short and sweet, too.
I'll do it. When it,
It's the third Tuesday at 11:30 a.m.
At the water.
So Kristen, you were interested, maybe we'll get you on one of these others
No,
then,
go ahead.
okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so it'll be the Chris and Mike and Steve and myself then. Solid Waste Committee, Dallas has been on the solid waste, I don't know anything, that's just kind of ad hoc, right?
It is.
I was waiting for
Now?
Appropriate.
How appropriate.
Any volunteers to be on the Solid Waste Committee, which apparently meets whenever they need to meet.
Right.
And when do they have to meet? When they have a major project they're promoting, or
Yep,
A
that's
decision.
pretty much it. Just
decision
keep-
about another municipality bringing waste in or something?
contracts that we entertain and potentially get into. It's ad hoc, like you say, it's advisory.
You can toss me on that one.
Okay, Kristen, thank you.
As long as you guys don't make jokes about me.
Oh, no, I promise.
Do it to you.
Not if you're here.
All right, Contractors Licensing and Appeals Board. Now, that's one where we're required to have someone, right? Because when there's an appeal, there's a formal process we have to go through. Dallas has been on that as well. And that meets every third Thursday at 4 p.m., really? It meets regularly, huh?
Yes. That doesn't necessarily mean, Mr. Mayor, that they always have an appeal to cover, but indeed, they do meet pretty frequently.
Anybody that feels you interested in some of these?
A lot of them,
Or is
I
it
would
your-
like to just
your
work-wise, I
schedule
wouldn't be
doesn't allow
able
you
to,
okay.
like that, I would love to be on, but, I'm still at work at that time,
Sure.
there's no way I can
No,
get
that's
out
not
of there,
totally
so
understood. It's part of the balancing act we all go through.
that's what's killing me.
Okay.
When's that meet, did you say?
Third Thursday at 4 p.m. And so we have a meeting in a couple of weeks. We could just kind of leave that one open too. Then Jolene, if we don't have a volunteer right now, let people think about it. And then maybe when we see a list, we'll see who's carrying the most load and maybe who needs to fill in a little more. Or if your schedule would require you make some trades, you could kind of say, hey,
Right.
I could do this one, but not that, and we'll try to work around things, so. Utilities Advisory Board, and Dallas was that person too, and that was every 4th Wednesday at 7 a.m. at City Hall. did he attend all of these regularly?
No.
The ones that I looked at on the, when I looked, a lot of times he wasn't, it showed that he was absent.
And I
Even
wanna
when he
make
was
sure we
there?
try to do these assignments.
Even when he was there?
I do wanna try to make these assignments in such a way that we can have a high attendance rate for all of them, because I think it just doesn't look good for us when people aren't coming to meetings.
That was Daniel's favorite one too.
The Utilities Advisory Board, oh, because of the 7 a.m., yeah, he always made a big point of that, didn't he? Yeah.
Is that a mandatory one?
That's a good question, I don't know, do you know, Carter? Are we required to have someone on the advisory board for the utilities?
We are not required. It's not the same as the old CPU board, which was a governing board, if you will, of the utilities. Nor is it the same as the regional water board. But no, we're not required.
Well, let's just leave that one open as well, Jolene, and we'll plow through this and see what's left. MPO, and Bob, you've been on MPO.
Yeah, and I would like to stay there in P and Z. The ones I'm on, I'd like to stay in.
And P and Z? Okay, does anybody wanna join Bob on either one of those as?
P and Z, if I can't make it, I usually like trying to have somebody go from council.
Maybe just like an alternate?
But actually, you're just an observer.
Cause that's, the planning and zoning is an evening meeting.
Yeah.
What time?
It's at 6 p.m.
I'll take it.
Okay, and you can be Bob's alternate then on that. Thank you, Ken.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Jolene, I think is a little,
Was that MPO?
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's planning and
No.
zoning.
Okay,
Yeah.
so MPO,
MPO is Bob.
okay, and now
And planning and zoning is gonna be Bob with Ken as alternate. Old Yellowstone Advisory Committee, Bob, we've got a whole list of them here for you. And you enjoy that work too as well.
Yeah, I do, and this one is an informal committee, there's no money control, there's no budget. It's basically you meet with the folks that started the OYD, and actually, you have to be a landowner or a business owner in OYD to be on it, and the one position that is not that is the one, I just represent the council. So, but it's just kind of a neighborhood group, is what it is, and, but there is no budget.
And you're willing.
We'd like to have one though.
You're willing to continue.
Never mind.
I will say as a parenthetical remark, years ago, we had a discussion about how there should be some rotation because you get comfortable with a certain board and you know all these people. But if we did a rotation, you'd learn a lot more about what's going on in the city and so we never really put anything in place, but I understand the argument. OYD Architectural Review Committee, that's yours as well, Bob.
Yeah, I do, I enjoy that because we get to see some of the properties when they're moving in and we pretty much, it's kind of the enforcement arm, if you will, of that code. Our building code is different in OYD, and I started working with that 10, 12 years ago, even before I was on council. And so it's handy to know a little bit about the code, and you literally review plans and give them suggestions, and they don't really have, I guess they do have the power of the code, but it's a little bit different than what the rest of our building code is. And we don't always meet. It's only when there's a plan to review.
Oh, so it says each Friday at 9, but that's not true.
It's on the calendar every Friday at 9, and then Liz
How do
lets
you-
us know when we are
Oh, I
gonna
see.
meet.
She just lets you know, yeah. All right, then the Platte River Restoration Advisory Committee. Jolene, that sounds like your baby.
is.
First Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., City Hall. And Dallas was assigned to that?
Your Honor, yes, the chairman of that committee, Tom Swanson, makes those meetings ad hoc anymore. He feels like if there's not a lot on the, to discuss, he doesn't have the meeting. And so this past year, I believe we only had one meeting. We're getting ready to go to bid, and so I anticipate for a project from First Street to the Railroad Bridge, so I anticipate there will be a few meetings coming up. But when we do meet, it's the first Wednesday at 5:30, and from 5:30 to 6:30, an hour, very strict.
You can put me on there, Johnny.
Okay, Ray, thank you. DDA, I've been representing the council on DDA. I guess I'm willing to continue.
When do they meet?
That's, second Wednesday at 11:30, lunch meeting. And Amoco Reuse Joint Powers Board, and here we have Bob again.
Yeah, I serve as the city's rep, and there's a county rep, that the spot is tentatively, it's still open. But, that one does have money and have a budget and a long-term plan, and it's basically tasked with, development of the Amico properties, including downtown and up by the, revenue station.
Sure.
And I do kind of enjoy that
You
one.
want to stay on that? Okay. Well, we're just plowing right through this. And then the Chamber of Commerce. We have not had a representative on the Chamber of Commerce because Amanda was the last one we have signed, and I'm pretty sure they'd like to have somebody.
When is it?
It meets the third Tuesday at 4 p.m. That's part of our problem, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
Problem.
Is you have to go there right before council
Right
meeting.
before, typically.
That's rough. I could do it, and then just leave when it's time to come to a meeting. Unless
I
you
mean,
were
I would think if you were there for half hour, if there was anything critical, they'd let you know and you come over here.
That's on the Tuesday?
It's the third Tuesday at 4 p.m.
I don't mind taking it if that's okay.
If you want it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess while we're talking about the boards and commissions, we have had some interesting discussions over the years about which candidates for which boards this council should interview. And we've kept that to a pretty small number. What are we down to? Planning and zoning, and is there anyone else that we actually interviewed as a council?
Mr. Mayor, if I understood correctly, the direction was to simply have them come to a pre-meeting as a candidate that has been selected by the respective committee. And your interview, if you will, would be that meeting opportunity at a pre-meeting.
Oh, you're right. I don't know that we deliberately decided that, because we had at one point a process where we were interviewing a lot of the people and we realized we just didn't have time.
And this has actually worked pretty good in my opinion.
To basically delegate that to the boards and commissions, just choose their own members. Chris?
Yeah, well, and I know that the city will ask for you to sit on a interview board from time to time. I did on the Civil Service Commission board. And to tell you the truth, I think we can forego having them come down to a meeting. I have faith in the hiring board of that particular discipline. I don't see the point of bringing them down to give me a wave, so.
Any other opinions on whether we should continue that practice? I think that was Dallas's initiative. I don't know if it was meaningful to them or not, but Mike?
Well, yeah, I think Dallas said, well, he wanted to at least see these people and see that they were alive. You know, on some of these, like specifically planning and zoning, you know, these are important. And it's like last week when we had that appeal on that sign thing. And I kind of, since then I've thought about that a lot. And one of the main reasons that I voted against that was that I feel that if we're sitting in something like that as an appeal, that, you know, we shouldn't just substitute our judgment for that board or commission or whatever, but that we should overturn their decision only if there's a good reason, or if there's demonstration that something new and different came up, or that they acted in an arbitrary, capricious manner or an unlawful manner or something like that. That puts a lot of authority into those boards and commissions. Specifically, like with planning and zoning, I think maybe we should have to take the time to talk to these people before we appoint them on that. A lot of these other ones, I don't, not to say that they're not equally important, but like planning and zoning, that really impacts a lot of things, because if we're gonna have zoning ordinances, you either have to put some teeth in them and enforce them and say that, or we just sit there and say, you know, the rule is that there is no rule, you can just go out there because we're gonna grant a variance for every single thing that comes along. I think maybe we should be talking to these people a little bit more, specifically on planning and zoning. Now, some of the other ones, I might not feel so strongly.
There have been rumblings, that's all I would call them, in the past, about some of the selections made that, you know, it was people recruiting their personal friends to be on the board because they knew they would vote with them and that sort of, and I don't think we've really had a problem with that, but, I mean, you could make an argument that the elected representatives should have more say in those things than just delegating it to the board, but at the same time, I don't think we've really had problems, and they've made good selections, Bob.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would tend to agree with Mike because there are a lot of decisions that the Planning and Zoning Board makes that are not appealable to council. Matter of fact, well, I don't know, perhaps our council could tell us what they are, but some of those things are not appealable to council. They're the final ruling. So we need to have people in there that we think have pretty level-headed. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure, neighbor against neighbor versus something, but there are also times when planning and zoning has to go by what our rules say they are. And there are, I could think of one instance we had about a year ago. We had a lady that had a commercial property, or she had an R3 property in North Casper, and she had a commercial property next door.
Oh, I remember it well.
Junky. Well,
The
the
4-foot
P&Z
fence
was,
versus the 6-foot fence.
yeah, the P&Z was pretty well forced to say you can't build this fence.
And we changed.
And in fact, she appealed that to this body, and we said, let's change the rule, and we did.
Are you arguing for us interviewing them?
I think P&Z is really important to do that because they're the first line in defending what we do with our laws and building codes.
I can't remember the last time we did interviews, so, Chris?
On those things, typically, one of us is gonna be on or associated with that board. Why can't we just make it so that that council member is part of the interview and selection?
This
As
was
opposed to us doing all the interview and
That's what
selection.
we did on the municipal court board, where we had the committee interview the candidates, and then we brought forth our recommendation to council.
Okay.
And so the same thing we did on the Travel and Tourism Council, where for the other city representative, we did interviews, the board did interviews, and then we brought forth the recommendation to
Right.
council. And
Right.
during the round the table, I would bring it up and say, this is what happened, who we chose.
Were you waiting?
Well, the only thing I was gonna say is the fact that there are not very many appeals from planning and zoning. You know, if we have a wishy-washy board there that just grants every variance that comes along, you know, then yeah, those don't come to the council. If we have a board there that denies everything that comes along, well, you know, that, because I remember back when Bob Mullen was the city attorney and Dave Clark was an assistant, and it just drove them nuts that there was a planning and zoning board in place then, that everybody that came in, they granted every variance that came along, and so they said, well, geez, you know, throw out all these zoning rules because you're granting every variance that comes along. I just have a pretty strong feeling that I think the council should have more of a direct say in who's sitting there and interview these people and say, well, what's your philosophy on this? You know, is it your philosophy to grant every variance that comes along, or to deny every one, or what?
I would guess at least 2 or 3 of the current members of the board were selected by council when we were doing that. So it's a hassle, you know, it's one more meeting, and we usually, I think if I remember right, we would have a subcommittee of 3 or 4 council members basically agree to do a series of interviews at a certain time. But then staff has to set all of that up.
All right.
It's a job. So but if people feel we should be doing that, then that's what the majority wants. Is that what you guys are proposing?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with interviewing, but I think right now we've got Wallace, who is also, he is essentially assigned the lawyer duties for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I must admit, he runs a pretty tight ship. He makes sure that when they award something or when they deny something, they have to have it written down and it has to be part of the record. So he does help keep them on the straight and narrow, and he does a good job at it.
So just to get the suggestion on the table, Chris is saying we can trust the board to make their decisions. You guys are saying maybe we should be a little more involved. Ray, what do you think?
Well, maybe there's a compromise within what Chris was suggesting, going to just having 2 or 3 council members do the interviewing process. And being able to do that. And we've done that before. Maybe that's just something, that way we're not taking a whole meeting per se, but having that be a part of the.
So I suppose that way that would play out is there would be a resignation on planning and zoning. They would tell us, I would come to the next work session and ask for volunteers to sit on an interview committee, and then the committee would come back with a recommendation. The rest of us would go, okay, because we wouldn't know the people and we're
That
certainly not gonna
satisfies me.
Okay. Any other commissions that we should consider that for, or is it just planning and zoning?
I think that's the most important one, because they can affect property law.
Mr. Mayor, the consistent sort of theme I'm hearing there is it's like a judicial sort of assignment, as it were. And if you have others that you think are judicial in that regard, it might be worthy to consider. in that regard.
Well, and we can always, if we don't like how things are playing out, we always have the authority to take that from the committee and make it ours if we want to have more say in those matters. But I think if we were to do that now, we're solving a problem that doesn't exist.
This
Because
is
for the most part, they've operated well, so.
Civil service is the only other one that I think might rise to a similar level, but, you know, if there's not a problem, let's know there's been a problem.
The last 2 selections, Civil Service Commission and the city staff have asked me to sit in on the interview, and it's been myself and 2 other members of the Civil Service Commission that are there, so. It's where the last 2 have been done. I don't know if that's just common practice or.
Any other comments on how to go about this?
Is DDA one of them? Or could it be one of them?
You know, DDA has been about the Davis Street Station
Right.
almost exclusively for the past 2 or 3 years, plus running the parking garage. So, it's been really more operational in nature in terms of how to make those things work.
Well, the reason why is walking downtown, talking to some of the downtown folks, the owners of the businesses and merchants and stuff like that. There's been several of them that has felt the people that are on DDA is kind of stepping over them or making them, forcing them into certain things or whatever. And I don't know who the DDA is is set up by, but I guess that's why I was just asking is if there are people that are on it that are mainly in that area, not part, I guess, downtown or other things, wondering if we should step in and kind of make it more.
Well, I don't know what the statutory requirements are as far as membership. I know that I believe there's a certain number of the members have to be owners of properties downtown, commercial properties downtown. I don't think they all have to be, I just don't remember the makeup. It is an arm of the city, essentially. And they have selected their own replacements when people have resigned or turned out.
Right.
So,
And
and there needs to be a mechanism in place for making people voice those complaints. And really what they should be doing is telling you and then you telling me as the council rep, so that I could go back and say, we're hearing these concerns.
Right.
But I think them choosing their own people, I think we're running into the same thing as like planning and zoning.
Well, let's find out more about what their complaints consist of, if you can, and then we'll see if we can resolve it with the current structure. And see, because they have been accused of using the DDA to benefit their personal businesses, and I can tell you there's really no mechanism for DDA to do that. They run the whole thing on a budget of $140,000, I think. It's a lot of volunteer time. But we've got to have, that's one of the reasons to do the round the table, is so that people can voice those concerns and we can investigate, see if there's some merit. Okay, anything else on boards and commissions?
Have something, Mr. Mayor? Each of you will be obviously receiving minutes and so forth from the meetings that you attend and the various committees and commissions that are out there. We have instituted what we call the information packet, which allows you to provide minutes to a repository, if you will, that we disseminate to all of the council. So that if indeed you aren't reporting to the council on a routine basis about your meetings and committee meetings and so forth, the minutes, if you'll give them to us or if you'll have your staff connections given to us, we will be sure they get in the information packet, and you'll have that constant flow of information to you if you're reading the information packet, so that you can follow what each of the committees and boards are doing. And so please use that, and we will be sure that those continue to come to you.
And I'm pretty sure that every board and commission has something equivalent to a public comment period. And so that would also be a response, Ken, when you hear those complaints, is you should go to the DDA and tell them what you're upset about. Because a complaint that isn't voiced in the right venue, you know, is never gonna result in anything. So, okay, yeah, Mike.
I like to do drugs and alcohol. So, if you could go, and I'll be doing
Says that on the
what I volunteered to do.
The drug court?
To do the drug court and the meth task force.
I think the meth task force has been disbanded.
As a,
I think
okay.
it has, Tim.
Yeah,
Well,
I
then
think
you
that
might
lost
note
its
that-
oomph when the meth project was
Okay,
defunded.
well, you might note then that I'll be sitting in with the drug court.
Okay.
They serve food too, so.
Okay. You know some of those people too, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Steve?
When was public safety communications?
There it is. Oh, I don't have that. I don't know.
Y'all happen to have the
Is it the PSOC?
PSCC.
It is on Thursdays at 10, quarterly, and it's pretty much right now as needed.
Okay. I wonder if when we put the calendar, just thinking out loud here, when we put the calendar together and those things are listed, I wonder if we should just put the name of the council member in parentheses behind it, so that if I have some concern, I've heard some concern about PSCC and I see it on the calendar and you're the one going, I can call you up. I know that's yours. Does that seem worthwhile?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's our reminder too, to say, oh, there's my name, I guess I'm supposed to go to that.
Mr. Mayor, I would add that pursuant to the direction this evening, we will update this list so that each of you have a list of the commitments that you've volunteered for, and you'll have that for your use and edification.
Cool. Thank you all for stepping up and volunteering to do these things. Okay, if there's nothing else on boards and commissions, let's do the agenda review for council coming up next week. And we're gonna have our formal council meeting next week and on the 29th, is that our plan?
Correct. The work session.
The work session on the 29th, so we only have the formal council meeting. Right, I'll get that.
But Mr. Mayor and members of the council, for the 29th, we are planning on having the long-awaited event center audit. We think we'll be ready for that in 2 weeks. We need to talk about the budget calendar, which is kind of our guiding document for the creation of fiscal year 20's budget. And generally speaking, if you have questions or input as to the timing, that would be a good opportunity to discuss that. As we talked about last week, the CATSI route modification update will come forward pursuant to our sort of our federal timeline that we submitted. And then, of course, we're hoping that you can provide us direction for formal consideration in the first meeting in February. And then, of course, council goals discussion will be an opportunity for me to report back to you as to how 2018 went with regard to the council goals and directives that you gave us a year ago. And then, of course, what we can anticipate for what you'd like to do to update that document moving into 2019 and 2020.
So the way this will work then, the work session agenda for the 29th would start with council around the table, council agenda planning for, what, February 26th, 2019.
Or February 12th as well, right?
Well, if
The
we
work
want to
session.
do it 4 weeks in advance on the 29th, we would be planning the
Up until,
26th.
okay.
So we'll stick with what you guys have up until then.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. What about, what do we need to talk about with next week's council meeting on the 22nd? Next week's meeting.
Nothing, I don't have anything.
Mr. Mayor?
Some of the regular council meetings?
John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, I just happened to see Liz Becker outside the door as I was coming in, and she just learned of something today, and she was hoping it could go on next week's council meeting. That is to consider making another modification to the RFP for the Plains properties down there. Basically, what she would like to at least raise with you is the idea of letting people other than just the Plains properties submit a bid for the parking lot to the south of the Plains tree lines. There may be some interest with some of the properties to the west of the Plains building, the livery area, that type of area, to actually make a bid on that parking lot as well, in conjunction with the livery or the other properties there to the west. And so I think she would like to at least have you consider that, and if so, we probably need to get another amendment to RFP out just as soon as possible. So that's why I was hoping we could consider that at the next council meeting.
So we amended it so that the people, so who's ever bidding on the Plains property could include the parking lot, but now we're gonna make it available for somebody else to include it in their bid, I see, okay. Okay. Any concerns about doing that? Give Liz some time, okay. Anything else on next week's meeting that we need to talk about? We got a couple public hearings scheduled, or we're scheduling public hearings.
Then you have the animal care and liquor license thing, I think that might be plenty.
I think so too.
It's gonna be a long meeting.
Just a second. Oh, there's the liquor license one. Yeah, I have a question about that. And because we spent a lot of time on that, but we have 3 members here who weren't involved in those discussions, and they're gonna be asked to vote. I'm just wondering if we are ready. I know that it's been talked about a lot, but should we have another discussion? And we also had the discussion about whether we should be making changes, suggested changes now in a work session, or if we should just wait till we're on the floor and make amendments. So, were you gonna say something, Chris, about that?
Well, I'd recommend that if you know about suggested changes prior to, certainly make them here so we can streamline amendments and all that kind of stuff. But as far as putting them off, unless there's some significant issues that need to be discussed, I wouldn't be for it.
Any other opinions about this?
I would agree with Chris. I know new members have come on before, I had to make some tough choices and do some research, so.
I guess I'd like for us to be prepared for the possibility that we'll have some testimony in the public hearing that might have us rethink some of the language in the ordinance? And if so, what we've done in the past is we've simply tabled, or we've said we're gonna talk about this one more time in a work session before we're gonna go to second reading. And that's the way this process should work. So people should feel comfortable to make that suggestion if the public testimony that we hear, because we haven't really heard from the liquor dealers or the general public about all of this. And there's some pretty substantial changes. I know there's some people who are really uncomfortable with the idea of putting that responsibility on servers. So, okay, well, let's just go ahead and Steve.
I was just gonna say, I'm comfortable moving forward. I was part of the rewrite of the demerit system, and now with this change taking place, I'm well versed in the demerit system is the way it was, so.
Anything else on the agenda for next week that people have questions about, or? Declaring city-owned property as surplus property, is that just kind of item to outlive their usefulness?
Mr. Mayor, that is the mechanism available to us to offload equipment that is no longer useful for us. And it's typically the consent item.
Alright. And we're pretty comfortable with the language in the animal care ordinance as written, and we're ready to put it out and hear what people have to say. It's gonna be a long meeting next week, guys, I'm afraid.
I have one question that I would kind of like to just get what the feeling of the rest of the council is. I liked the language in Councilman Walsh's original proposal that basically required animals to be leashed or properly contained even when they're on their private property. Am I the only one that's in favor of that kind of a restriction? Because if I am, I'm not going to make a big fuss about it. If other people, because to me, we're talking about the issue of dog bites and dogs molesting people as they're walking and everything, but we're also talking about keeping the animals safe. And to me, it just makes no sense that, okay, you got this dog sitting there running around loose in its own yard, but there's nothing to say that that dog's not going to go charging across the street and go after somebody or run out in front of a car and get injured and all of that. And frankly, one of the things that I'm inclined to want to ask people that come and offer public comments there, if they start going off on, well, I think that if it's on my private property, I should be allowed to let my dog run around loose. I'm going to ask them, how does that enhance the protection of your dog's safety, of the people that are walking along, driving along, and all that kind of thing? Tell me what I'm missing here. Tell me how that makes the world safer and better. But if I'm the only one that has an inclination that way, I'm not going to waste time bringing things up. But I'm just curious if anybody else has any feelings in that regard.
Comments?
I feel the same way you do, but of course, when I brought it up to people, when people have talked to me about the animal care ordinance, immediately the first response is, "Y'all can't tell me what to do on my private property," and it's just one of those unfortunate things where I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, but I see, what a young mother with a child is saying when a dog starts charging down the yard and she's on the sidewalk. I mean, she's not on private property. So, I mean, I think it's a very
balance.
exactly.
Well, it came across as we're gonna require people to put a fence in the front yard, and it's not gonna contain most dogs anyway, because it can only be 4 feet. That's one of the arguments.
Exactly.
But we're not saying that. If we do that, you could have your dog on a leash. They can be tethered for a certain length of time, right? Up to 2 hours, is that right?
Say 2 hours.
Take your dog out,
Supervised.
tether it for 2 hours, and it would still be in your front yard and have access to.
Or in their backyard.
Well, in the backyard, that's obviously the ideal solution for most people, if they have one. Chris?
Yeah, the hype on that spun completely out of control. If your dog won't stay in the fenced-in front yard, then build a 6-foot fence in the backyard or don't have it. There's a responsibility of maintaining, you live in a neighborhood, you live in a city, there's concessions that have to be made. We don't live in the county. The argument about can't tell me what to do on my property, I mean, let's just go down the list. You can't abuse your children, you can't cook meth, you can't make booze, you can't shoot off your back porch at the squirrels. We've got a million things that we tell you can't do. And it kept going to, well, the 3-foot fence in the front yard won't contain them, and keep them in the back.
So you're agreeing with Mike that we should,
Oh, I think it should be in there. I don't know that we'll pass all the rest of it if it's in there. I mean, so that lies right here.
I'm with you guys too.
And I'm not asking
So-
people, clearly, you know, we can't make any decisions, and I really respect the idea that we cannot make decisions until we're, you know, until the final product comes up for a vote in an open meeting. I'm not asking people to proclaim themselves one way or the other. All I'm saying is that I'm not gonna make a motion to amend that and put that language back in if I'm the only one standing out there howling at the moon.
Well, what's going to go in the packet, unless we give staff a different direction, is the proposed amendments that will allow a dog to sit on the front porch untethered. That's what it says now, correct, Mr. Henley?
I don't remember for sure, and I was gonna look at that tomorrow,
Okay.
look at your meeting again tomorrow.
And but I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
what
what
it
it says,
says.
so we would have to amend it.
So it
Because
would
it'll
have
go,
to be offering, I would have to be, or someone would have to be offering that as an amendment.
and if we already know that there's support for that, then the question is, are we being fair with people by giving them the impression that we're about to pass something that doesn't have that restrictions, but we all know that there's enough support that that amendment may in fact pass, and that they wouldn't feel a need to come to the hearing.
And how soon would that proposed amendment need to be into you guys to be in that packet, or is that time already passed?
No, I think if it's there on Friday, again, just like anything else in that goes out in the packet, if we have it by Friday at, 10 a.m., 11 a.m., something like that, we can get it modified, and if you're available, then we can make sure that we have it done the way you want it.
Because I absolutely agree, it's fair, you know, if this is potentially gonna come up as an amendment, I'd want people to be advised of that, and,
Well, couldn't we give staff direction right now to make that change?
Will it be
Or-
a change or just a proposed amendment?
It'll have to be proposed amendment.
Yeah.
It
Okay,
can't
because-
change it right now.
Okay.
It has to be up there.
Okay.
John, would you mind undertaking to do that, to say an alternative possible amendment might be the language that Chris had originally had, that the dog has to be contained by by a fence that would keep it contained, or a leash, an adequate leash?
Sure, that would be great, and I'll be happy to do that, and same thing with the liquor. I know that some of you with the liquor ordinance that we discussed, I think one of these was now over a month old that we have in our work session, so if you still have those amendments in mind, let me know, and we'll have them drafted up so you can see them in writing before they go out.
Okay. So you're not the only one.
Yeah, okay, well,
Okay, anything else on the agenda? It says legislative update, and I'm not really prepared to talk much about what's going on with them. I haven't had a lot of communications. Carter, did you wanted to say something about the gun restrictions?
Mr. Mayor, there's a couple things I'd like to update the council on, if I may. You may have seen me texting on my phone, and I apologize, because I don't typically do that in a meeting. I think it's not appropriate for me to do. On the other hand, I did get a flurry of information that we did confirm that the Corporations Committee, it's corporations, right?
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
military affairs was the
And
same.
transportation, yeah. Military Affairs and Transportation did overturn their decision to locate the skilled nursing facility in Buffalo and unanimously selected Casper.
Wow.
What?
To do that. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a big
Good job.
turnaround, huge turnaround, huge turnaround. Now, that doesn't mean it's a done deal. It'll still be deliberated furiously on the floor, and will be debated up until the very last minute that they make a decision on the floor. But it's a huge
That's awesome.
huge turn of events. for us, that's for sure.
Well,
Good
thanks for
deal,
your efforts.
very good deal.
Perfect.
The other thing I would mention, and we sent out an email earlier in the week requesting direction if you're prepared to do it. And I recognize that you may not be tonight, but there is quite a discussion lately with regard to the repeal of gun-free zones, of which, as you are all aware, include council chambers and council meetings with regard to the opportunity that would exist if it passes to bring weapons into those meetings, both concealed and non-concealed. I would like, if council is ready, to carry forward your direction so that I'm not ahead of you as it relates to advocating one way or the other. Because certainly as we go to Cheyenne between now and the end of the session, those kinds of questions generally come up, and it would be nice for me to have your feel as to that issue so that I'm not speaking out of turn or not consistent with your direction. We sent you a copy of the draft this week, and if you haven't had the opportunity to read it, I understand, but if you were prepared to give me some informal direction, I'd sure appreciate it.
Opinions, Mike?
I'd like to see the law stay exactly as it is. At a absolute minimum, I agree with everything that you said on the TV last night, I think it was, Charlie, where, you know, that it is just bizarre that all of a sudden the legislature wants to preempt local bodies from governing themselves. But I'd like to see it stay where it is.
Okay.
If I can too, one, I'd like to know McFeeder's position on this as well, because I know it's involved in. What I read was it was for concealed only. Concealed, it has to be concealed. I didn't see it as you can bring it.
Said if you have a concealed weapons permit.
Right. That you cannot just bring in a gun, it has to be concealed in a permit. But I'd like to, and that's what schools, chambers, like you said, so I'd like to get his opinion on it, and then after that, I will share, I guess, mine.
Okay. Chief, would you
If that's okay.
care to tell us your opinion on this?
Mayor, Councilman, I appreciate the opportunity to, I've been asked for a personal opinion, and I'm compelled to also give a public safety perspective. I've been interviewed repeatedly regarding the potential aspects of this bill. Uniformly, I believe that council sessions are a place where our citizens should feel free to come in and speak. Oftentimes there are opposing persons present, and our elected officials are elected to hear those opposing points of view. My personal opinion is that the presence of firearms can tend to quell one side of the discussion versus the other. Now, that's a personal opinion. Let me address this from a public safety. There has been times in my tenure here when the topic and the volume and the passion that was being present in the room caused me to have to go down to the front just so I could have a better view, so that I could offer some sense of safety and protection to both the citizens in attendance and the council members and the city staff. From a practical point of view, the setup of our room, would make it nigh on impossible for me to stop in a timely manner anything that was happening. That was when I started bringing in an additional officer to be present, because it just, it would be impossible for me to stop something before several people were tragically hurt or injured. For those reasons, I would recommend that we keep it the same. It is not possible for me to safeguard the citizens that are attending. It's not possible for me to safeguard them from intimidation or the possibility of intimidation, since that's a personal perception anyway. And so I would recommend that we keep it the same. That being said, I'm a gun owner, I'm a lifetime member of the NRA, and so I see both sides of this. But there are places, and in my own opinion, we reserve those places which are prone to emotional debate. is something that we probably should preserve those in a gun-free zone. For example, courtrooms, hospital, emergency rooms, things like that, where people get emotional, they begin to become irrational, it becomes problematic. Sir, did I answer your question?
I could, okay.
Go ahead.
I thought I'd maybe just give you a context. I'm the only person who voted for it, I think. The restriction, the ordinance that we put in place that made it illegal to bring, to open carry in a council meeting. And the context on that was that the state legislature removed the requirement for a permit to conceal carry, and they identified, I believe, a total of 12 places where you couldn't conceal carry. Churches, courtrooms, schools, and government meetings. And all we did was say that the open carry rules should be the same as concealed carry, which is just what the state put in place. So that's what we did back in 2012, I think, early 2012. So that was the history of all of this. And it was for exactly the reasons that Chief McFeely just outlined, that we wanted to have an open discussion without people feeling intimidated by the presence of firearms. So that was it.
How have the school resource officers responded? I mean, considering that it would also allow people with concealed permits to take weapons into public schools.
So we have, Mayor, Councilwoman, we have taken a uniform stance that the most appropriate safeguard of our children is an armed police officer in our schools. We broached the subject that although we don't create school policy, we broached the subject with them that it's very confusing when officers are arriving and we don't know. Based upon limited information, we're essentially on seek and destroy missions. And that leaves it open for a well-meaning teacher or a well-meaning parent could end up on the wrong end of that. And so we've trained heavily for a rapid response, which is the reason why we as a city have dedicated enormous resources into our schools, particularly this year is to provide that safety and security. But having that additional mayhem of, people will often claim I'm a good shot, right up until we test them under stressful circumstances, not a static circumstances. So we've taken a uniform stance, informed, school, their board of directors, that's their decision, but we've rendered at least our opinion. We would prefer to be the armed emergency response, only to eliminate the confusion and the chaos.
Sean?
I'm probably the minority here, but I am completely against gun-free zones, and there's several reasons why. I believe that I, as an individual, am responsible for my own safety, and that I don't trust anybody else 100% other than myself. There's also a Supreme Court ruling that ruled that police officers do not have a constitutional duty to protect anybody, and it was recently upheld by a Florida federal court judge. And that came about because of the incident in Broward County, Florida, where police officers sat outside of school while children were systematically executed. So, I sit and think, well, what if a teacher or an administrator or a principal had a gun in that school? Could things have been different? So that's my major hang-up.
Thank you. I have to agree with Mr. Sean. I mean, ultimately is total respect to everything that you've said. But if a person came in with a gun that we didn't know about anyways, you'd still be in the same situation. Still into the council chamber, came in with a gun, you'd still be in the same aspect. At least if there's other people that can carry in there, you know what, that, yeah, there might be crossfire, but you know what, they're going to want to protect us as well. I would want to protect myself. I am all for this. I believe I believe we should have the right to carry wherever and protect ourselves. So I agree with you 100%.
And just as a follow-up, I mean, I had a friend who was in the Aurora Theater when it was shot up. And he had to lay in a pile of bodies to cover himself, completely defenseless, when this guy's just executed. And I think, you know, when seconds count, police are minutes away.
Like you mentioned, you had the two shootings in Colorado. They made it absolutely no guns, and if people had it, would the theater got shot up as much, and the other one, I don't think it would have. Not if it was legal. So, yeah.
Mike?
I think we need to keep a couple things in mind. Unless we're talking about enacting an ordinance outlawing guns in school, I think the school situation is something that's not really on our plate. I can tell you that over my years as a judge, I attended a lot of very, very good courtroom security training sessions. And courtroom security is very much like security in our meetings. Absolutely, the statistics stand for the proposition that the fewer guns that you have in that kind of environment, the less likely it is that an innocent bystander is going to be injured. That is an absolute across all those statistics. The idea, frankly, even the idea that trained bailiffs, trained officers, the danger of ricochets, the danger of somebody popping their head up at the wrong time and all that stuff, just really militates against more firearms rather than less. And absolutely, when you get to the point of, you know, untrained people carrying guns around in there, the statistics just go through the roof. You know, the people that put on those kind of training sessions, just, you know, they're just like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want this? It's tough enough even when you have trained officers, trained guys that work in that environment every day. You know, the risk of accidental shootings and accidental hit is high. You don't want people in there that are not trained. That's where I come from.
Here's where I come from. Okay.
You go ahead.
Well, to me, the issue isn't, if we want to follow the process that we just described tonight, where someone says, there's an ordinance on the books that says you can't open carry in city council chambers, and I want to bring that into a work session to see if there's a majority that wants to reverse that, or what's the word? When we revoke an ordinance, repeal that ordinance. That's the process we would follow. And I would be fine with that if 5 people said, we need to discuss that and discuss whether we want to repeal that ordinance. To me, that's not the issue. The issue is that we have an ordinance, and they're trying to tell us that we didn't have the authority to pass it. That's the home rule issue. I'd like to think that if the opposite were the case, that we had passed an ordinance that it was allowable and the state tried to overturn us, I would say the same thing. We should be controlling our own affairs and how our own council room is managed. And the state, in this case, is trying to take that authority away from us. That, to me, is the issue, not the merits of whether that ordinance should be in place. The point is, it is in place until it's repealed. And as long as it's in place, we should stand behind it. So that's my opinion. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I mean, I listened to the arguments, and I was the police chief when we banned the open carry. And I can support and I can attack each and everybody in here, their position on it. So, are the police 2 minutes behind? Almost every single time. Could lives be saved by the right person in the right spot with a weapon? Absolutely. Does it make it difficult when you go into a school and there's adults with firearms? Sure it does. Ask me what it's like to walk into a civilian population and decide which person to engage with a weapon. It's addressed by training, but it also slows things down. So there are a lot of pros and cons. Courtroom, of course, it's safer not to have a weapon in there. Nobody's walking through a metal detector in this building. So a concealed weapon in a council room is probably the best of the worst case scenario as far as the intimidation thing goes. So, but there's a lot that can be put behind it. And is the proposed that the concealed carry, that the weapon be concealed carried and not open carry? Because I think they're going to go hand in hand.
I'm not sure what the.
I don't know what it is. Right now, open carry is virtually non-restrictive.
Right.
And it's the concealed carry. So I imagine that this says that we can't, well, I suspect this law will say that we can't regulate firearms, right?
I would agree with that.
Well, it says they have to have a Wyoming concealed weapons permit
Yep.
to be able to do it.
That's
And
the
they
current.
can-
It does require
It's the
that.
current
The
version.
current version says you have to have a Wyoming concealed carry permit.
The current version that's being proposed? Okay.
Yeah, yes.
So it doesn't address open carry at all.
But
No.
I don't know.
No,
I know you have to have a concealed weapons permit.
But I think they address our ability to restrict or to regulate gun laws.
Firearms, yes.
yes, and it did say that as well.
And that's the kernel of the issue.
So Carter's asking for direction. I guess we're all over the place on this deal.
Well, but are we at least, is there at least a consensus that we don't think that the state should come in and superimpose their will
Yep.
over, with the home rule question that you articulated? Carl?
Saying I don't think that they are. I think they're trying to go I don't think that they're trying to tell us we're wrong.
Oh, no,
I think
no, I'm sorry, Ken, but you totally misunderstand. The direction that they wanna go is they wanna say that no, cities, towns, school boards, all those, you can't make rules on this.
That's what I
We're preempting you from making any rules yourself. That's absolutely the core of what they're saying.
okay, I didn't read it that way. So.
Ray?
The frustrating part is that we have a legislative body, and I've said this before, a legislative body that does not like overreach by the federal government, and they believe in autonomy. And no matter where I fall on this issue about guns and places, the bigger issue, I think, is our autonomy to be able to make our own decisions. And so we have a legislative body that are hypocritical by saying the federal government should not tell us what to do. Well, in the same sense, the state government is trying to tell us what to do at a municipal level, and it's just hypocritical. And I know that's more of a statement and an opinion, but I think that's the problem that we're facing. And I agree with what you're saying, Shelley.
That's a bad law unless it's a law that goes in the direction you want.
But if it does pass, I think it would be at the Supreme Court anyway, eventually.
would go to the Supreme Court.
Somebody's gonna sue.
Yeah.
Well, my suggestion would be that we tell Carter to advocate for home rule. And then if there is a sense amongst council members that we should consider repeal of our existing ordinance, we handle that as a separate matter. That's my suggestion. I don't know how many of you agree with that.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So feel free to bring that up around the table, and we'll see if there's a group that wants to revisit that. So, okay, anything else on legislation?
Our senatorial delegation have asked us to come down and testify on behalf of the stormwater legislation next week, and we will be doing that, and beyond that, I don't have anything else.
Okay.
What was the committee that came out of? Our
Corporations.
corporations committee? I mean, our VA center.
Fees.
That would have been the Military and Transportation Committee.
Okay, well, let's do around the
TRW.
table then and get out of here.
Transportation,
So,
recreational,
anything
wildlife.
tonight, Sean?
Thank you, Chris.
I did attend at lunch today. It was an announcement for a concert this April. It's Old Dominion coming to town. April 10th, I believe, is the date. So the event center had this kind of reveal party at Wonder Bar this afternoon.
that's all I have. I have a CACVB meeting next week. That's it.
Why don't we interrupt right now?
That'd be great.
Kelly, you need to talk to us?
Just like briefly.
Please.
All right. I got some direction from the previous council, but followed up, got things taken care of. These are the expungement packets I'm passing out. Just based on the statutes, couldn't do just one, so we had to do 4 based on juvenile, whether there was an arrest, dismissal, status offense, non-status offense. I send these over to bar counsel for review so that I'm not giving legal advice to defendants, so that we don't get in trouble in that area. He approved those, and I'm gonna send an email for council's peace of mind that he sent, with regard to that.
There's gonna be a fast fail quiz on all this.
There is.
Yeah.
Who can fill out the packets fastest? Basically what I did is I went in and, looked at the divorce custody packets that the state has, that the Supreme Court has approved for use. Try to use that as a format, came up with these. Mr. Kelly with the city attorney's office kind of checked them over for me before I sent them to bar council, just making sure I didn't miss any high points. And then I sent them over to Mark Gifford. And so we're ready to go ahead and put those up on the website and release those to the public. They are, I mean, they're not most user-friendly, but what I guess in the statute is user-friendly. If anybody's ever taken a look at the divorce packet, it's like 100 and some odd pages, so I feel at least this is more friendly than that, so. I also told Mr. Gifford that, anybody else, any other municipalities that needed, to look at these forms, needed them, that we'd be happy to share those, just out of courtesy. There isn't any other forms like this, anywhere else, so I looked to try to find some that we could borrow, and we couldn't borrow any, so I just went ahead and developed some.
Just so I'm understanding, this is what someone would fill out to get something off of their record.
That's correct. There's status offenses, non-status offenses, arrests, dismissals, and juveniles. So, yeah, it's still gonna be challenging, but hopefully a little less.
Questions, comments for Kelly? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. You obviously worked hard on these.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, they took a little while.
What did you do the first time?
Yeah, I just breezed through them, so,
Thanks for waiting too.
yeah.
Sean, did you have anything?
Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, that is something we want to promote, is that concert. The event centers needs people in those seats. Steve? Mike, you got anything tonight?
No,
Ray?
Meeting with YAC on Thursday.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, I'm gonna be out of pocket for the next 2 meetings.
Fun stuff, I hope.
Yeah, hope so.
Good choice, too.
Yeah, sorry about missing the next one. I just wanted to bring up, in the hospital's bulletin that they send out called the Pulse, we had an incident that involved one of our city employees that was taken care of by some hospital people who happened to be there. And it's just kind of a cool little story, and I thought it might be something for a bright spot. You can read it in the Pulse, and I think we all get a copy of that. So, got new board members installed for the Amoco Joint Powers Board, and we had our first meeting of the new year last week. No real significant changes in direction, but you've still got a group working pretty hard to try and get something rolling on a conference center, not necessarily on Amoco properties, but there's a group in town studying this week, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Chris?
I'm gonna try out our new system.
You said what?
I'm gonna try out our new system. I'd like this to be on the 29th work session. I met with Brooke from Visit Casper. She has a plan of a multi-agency plan, a multi-organization plan to enhance outside ticket sales for CNFR. Our contribution would be $10,000. I just got a text from her a little bit ago that the county commission agreed to offer $10,000 as a match. So would the Economic Development Joint Powers, the intent. So right now the county commission is the only one that's in agreement. Economic Joint Powers Board and Visit Casper will also match it, with the idea of a contract position for outside ticket sales. And she discussed a lot of this with me, and I'm not a marketing person, so I suspect she knows more on that than what. Basically, we're missing out on at least 14,000 tickets that could be sold at the CNFR that we are not marketing to an audience. Contract position, if it's successful, the intent or the request would be that we maintain our part of the funding on that full time, because it's going to offset the cost of empty tickets or empty seats. I support her completely on it. Suspect we want to discuss that unless we want to just pass it right now. But $10,000, so we might make a mistake and lose 10 grand. We know we can continue to lose 14,000 tickets at CNFR, however many more, whatever next concert is. Well, we know how to continue to be in exactly the hole that we're in right now. Let's try something different. And if it's a failure, you guys, I'll be the one on the bill, so you can nail it to me.
We okay with talking about that in 2 weeks? And maybe staff can tell us where we could get $10,000 to do that, or what our options would be.
Ask Dallas.
Just tell us. Kristen, and I was remiss in not welcoming you at the beginning of the meeting. It's great to have you here and be part of this council.
Happy to be back in Casper. I just have a question that a constituent brought up to me that I, through my research, couldn't find an answer to, and I just don't know. They had brought the question to me of whom exactly can propose an ordinance or a change to an ordinance. Does it have to be a senior staff level or a council member? If it truly is a citizen, do they have to have a council member sponsored? Does a staff have to have a council member sponsored? I couldn't really find anything just like looking around, but
I would say the short answer is what we talked about earlier, that if you're convinced that it's something we should talk about, you would do it during this period of time and see if 5 people agree that it's something we should take a look at in a work session.
yeah, the question was just asked to me and I couldn't answer it.
It would almost always start in a work session so that we can A, decide if there's a consensus, and B, what the language will look like. And then there's a public hearing process, of course, and 3 readings before it would pass.
Okay.
So anyone on council, I'm gonna try to be very careful about that. Anytime that someone makes a suggestion, it's going to be discussed briefly by council to see if it's something worth pursuing.
So there's not a rule or,
Well, we create ordinance, so it would have to ultimately go through us anyway.
Yeah, it has to come through this process.
sorry, so the only reason I hesitated when the constituent asked me to not say council member is because the way I understood it is the alcohol ordinance is not being presented by a council member.
But
It's-
we approved
But
it.
we have to approve it, so we have to discuss it and approve it. We still have to vote on it. So the
Correct,
staff could bring,
correct.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
But then it ultimately falls with us.
Mr. Mayor,
Th-
that,
If I may, we did give Chief McFeeters direction about 6 or 9 months ago
Yes.
to give us an alternative to the current demerit system that was not really functional. And so really that was a follow-up to a request from council.
Okay.
If I said that correctly, so.
Yep.
what I was gonna suggest, because frankly, that's been a little bit unclear in my mind too, and you know, Mr. Henley, I wonder if you wouldn't mind in your spare time, looking and seeing, because you know, like in the legislature and Congress and those places, you know, there has to be a sponsor that
Yeah.
sponsors something. You know, I'm curious if we're playing fast and loose with something that way, or if it, you know, if you wouldn't mind rendering an opinion to us about just exactly how it is that something comes up, because we've sat there and I think the system's worked pretty good. Well, okay, let's, put this on the agenda and discuss it and move it forward instead of pass on 3 readings and that stuff. But, I wouldn't mind having some education on that, if you don't mind.
It's essentially been a majority of council that's given direction to staff to create a draft ordinance. Is the process, but go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, you really can't get away from, regardless of what the sponsorship idea looks like and what variation it takes and so on, of the notion that 5 people need to say it's coming on the agenda. It just doesn't matter, because you have to have a majority of council to direct any action that you take. And so even if we have Vice President Johnson that says, I want this on the agenda, if he doesn't have 4 of his buddies on his council to make that happen, it goes nowhere.
No, that makes sense. And honestly, I don't know what the question, I don't know if this citizen was planning on proposing an ordinance and didn't know, like, if, I don't know the context, I just didn't want to answer and be incorrect as far as, so I mean, ultimately, they could come and propose an ordinance, and if 5 of us said
Absolutely.
agenda.
They can come at any
Okay.
council meeting, any formal council meeting,
Okay.
come before the public and make a pitch to us. They could send us an email,
Yeah.
and typically when we all get an email, one of us will bring it up and say, what do we think of this?
Perfect, okay.
So there's ways for them to kickstart the process. Did you, Chris?
Yeah, I can tell you that the only one that stands out in my mind significantly is our bee and chicken ordinance was not generated by the council or staff. It was brought on by public at large asking for
Perfect,
it.
okay.
That's right.
But then we agreed, as a majority, to direct staff to create an ordinance.
Any chicken attacks yet?
I think it was Colonel Sanders.
Okay.
Colonel Sanders had brought it
Anything
in.
else? Ken?
It's more of a question. We get a lot of papers and packets and stuff with a lot of information regarding the meetings and things like that. I'm assuming everybody doesn't have a huge file and keep filing every single bit of the paperwork from every meeting that we have.
Bob does.
Does.
Actually, it's in here.
It's got an entire bedroom full.
Sorry.
Got a mainframe.
So do we need to, like, when we're done, or we feel we don't need it, do we need to destroy it ourselves? Can we bring it here to have it destroyed? Well, what do we do with all the, I guess, the stuff?
Well, virtually everything you get is a matter of public record. So very few documents that you receive are confidential. So they can be disposed of however you choose.
Okay.
Except if they're purple.
Yeah.
They're purple.
If they're
yeah.
purple,
And just
yes.
don't keep,
We'll
don't
let you
keep
know if
those.
there's
Leave 'em
something you
here.
can't.
Minutes of executive session and stuff, just leave them on the table with the city manager.
Everything else, all of this stuff here is
Okay.
public record.
Just double checking.
So,
Thanks.
good
That's-
question.
That's it.
Okay, I attended the Food Bank of the Rockies open house. They have a new facility east of town on Lathrop Road, well, near Lathrop Road, and it's just impressive what they do. I would encourage you to go out there and take a look at it. They basically get all the food that comes into Casper and distribute it to all our local food pantries and to food pantries around the state. They have 3 trucks that are constantly on the road. The amount of food in there is just mind-boggling, and it's pretty impressive what they do. So, and just the equipment that they have, the freezers and the coolers, I had no idea. Leisure Board met last week, nothing major. Got one of our staff members, Paul, whose last name I can't remember, Zawada, received an award for the quality of our field conditions, which he has been able to maintain with limited staff and equipment, and so that was a pretty cool thing. Rec Center is just under a lot of pressure with numbers, and their summer programs have just been very popular, and things are going good with our rec center, and the sports leagues are also in good shape. The soccer program is doing very well. A lot of good things happening in Casper. So, with that, I think we can call it good. Sorry we lasted so long. We'll try to do better as we move forward.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your help tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I apologize for being late.
We talked bad about you.
My ears are burning.
Okay.
Must be that old phone. I'm supposed to ask about.
Radiation.
Yes.